Good evening. Let me call to order this meeting of the City of Bloomington Plan Commission for November 14th, 2022. Let me start by just giving a brief overview of the agenda tonight. We will have some minutes to be approved, some reports and communications, a little bit of housekeeping. We have two petitions that have been continued to the December 12th meeting. Those are PUD DP 2421, petitioner Robert V. Shaw of the property at North Prow Road, 3500 block of North Hackberry Street, and SP 2422, petitioner is Hutter's Kirkwood 123 LLC. That is the property at 115 East Kirkwood Avenue. So those two petitions have been continued to our December meeting and will not be heard tonight. There are four petitions that will be heard tonight. Those are ZO 4022, petitioner Monroe County Government. This is the property at the northeast corner of I-69 and Fullerton Pike. We will then hear ZO 45-22. The petitioner is Saint Real Estate LLC. These are the properties at 300, 302, and 314 West First Street. We will then have ZO 5122. This is a text amendment to the UDO brought by the City of Bloomington. And then finally, ZO 5222, also petitioner City of Bloomington. And this is a very long property description that we'll get to when we get there. So that's what we're going to be doing tonight. We will start, though, first by calling the roll to be sure we have a quorum here. And I think we do have a few members that are joining us, at least one member joining us remotely tonight. Just one. Okay. So, yeah, Darla, would you please call the roll?
Randolph.
Here.
Ballard.
Here.
Burrell.
Here.
Seaboard.
Here.
Cochran.
Here.
Pereira.
Here.
Kinsey.
Here.
Smith.
Here.
St. John.
Here.
Whistler.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, so we do have a quorum. Let's proceed. We have minutes to be approved from our October 10th, 2022 meeting. Are there any questions or corrections to those minutes? Can we have a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second? Okay, we have a motion and a second. Let's go ahead and call the roll on everything tonight since we have a remote participant. But let's call the roll on the motion to approve the October 10th meeting minutes.
Ballard.
Yes.
Seaboard.
Yes.
Pereira.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Whistler.
Yes.
St. John.
Yes.
Kinsey.
Yes.
Cochran.
Yes.
And Burrell.
Yes.
Okay, the meeting minutes are approved. We will now move on to reports, resolutions, and communications. Are there any reports from staff tonight?
Thank you, Jackie Scanlon, Development Services Manager. We just wanted to briefly report that our office manager, Carmen Lillard, she celebrated her 33rd anniversary with the department yesterday, and she is retiring next week. So for those of you who have had the pleasure of working with her, this will be kind of our last opportunity to let you know publicly that she's leaving. So we wanted to make that announcement and, of course, thank her for all that she's done for us and continues to do. And looking forward to her next adventure for her and trying to fill those shoes for us when she leaves. So we just wanted to thank her and let everyone here know. So she'll be with us with the department through next Wednesday. If you wanted to reach out to her, she'll be here. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other reports from staff? Reports from commissioners. Commissioner Burrell.
I'd like to bring to staff's attention and previously sent them an email about an issue that we've been seeing quite a bit on the BZA. I'm part of the BZA, and which is the percentage of the commercial floor space that needs to be designated on first floor on multi-use buildings on downtown, in a downtown area. We've had several petitions of people requesting to reduce the percentage of commercial space so it can be used for parking or any other purpose. And given the current situation on the market trends of less retail and different things, I think we should consider maybe making looking into it for sure. I don't know what the answer is specifically, but making it more lenient for petitioners in terms of the amount of requirement for commercial space. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me, and I appreciate you bringing that to our attention. I've had a couple of similar conversations, and I recall that when we first adopted that standard, we had some discussion about revisiting it. There was not really, I think, a magic number. 50% was something we put in there, and I think we at the time even talked about maybe revisiting it once we saw how the market reacted to that. So I would just, second the idea that we revisit that, and maybe just ask staff in our next round of UDO amendments to make that an agenda item that we can revisit. Not to put you on the spot, Jackie or Scott, but would you care to comment on what you've seen in petitions, or if you recall kind of what the initial reasoning behind putting that requirement in place was?
Sure. Director Robinson can probably speak to how that came about initially. I think that's been in place as long as I've been here. But we did do a reduction when we did the large UDO update of where commercial is required and identified specific areas on downtown streets, because we're finding that commercial in some areas wasn't being filled. So I do think there is, we do understand that it's possible that needs to happen again, that another adjustment needs to be made, because as Ms. Burrell said, we have seen a number of, formally at BZA and also just in our informal discussions with potential developers or property owners, that they are finding that in some areas, the commercial size may be larger than they're able to support. I don't know if you know a little bit more about the history than I do there, Scott, but yeah, we are open to looking at it and have discussed that with Commissioner Burrell and Commissioner Ballard previously.
Scott Robinson, Director of Planning and Transportation. Thanks, Commissioners, for bringing this to our attention, and I will say that we will look into it. Every year we're bringing amendments to the UDO, and this is one that we can continue to look at. As Ms. Scanlon described, over the years, that standard has gone from what I believe to be 100% to a mapped area within the downtown, and then we've lessened that area, all in recognition of the challenges with both the changing marketplace with non-residential uses on the first floor and trying to balance that with the active, lively streetscape that we desire in our downtown community. So certainly happy to look at those standards and how we can achieve what those will be. Working with us on those amendments moving forward, that's something that we'll continue to look at. Some examples that we've looked at elsewhere is maybe not so much a percentage of the first floor, but how far back off the street we would achieve that same desirable look and feel for that building forward design. We'll see a similar concept that we're looking at in the overlay district tonight, so that could be something that we'll look at too. But happy to take that into consideration for a future UDO amendment. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Any other commissioners want to make any comment on that while it's on the table, or any other?
I mean, I'll just back up with Commissioner Burrell, being on the Zoning Appeals Commission with her, and as she said, we've had some pretty at-length discussions on this, and I think seeing the painstaking ways that some developers have gone through the process, and then been held up. I think there's a lot of, there's some time and money cost to that we can address and prevent from happening in the future in a pretty simple, straightforward way. And again, I'd be more than happy to help in that engagement. So that's it.
Mrs. Burrell, thank you for bringing that up. Obviously, I work in this area. I just returned this morning from the National Association of Realtors and met with many brokers around the country. And this requirement's in several of the planning, and we're seeing, because of the change of market, we're seeing that the need flexibility in that. And so we're seeing a lot of, I obviously understand the reasoning when the time was, the walkability. I think it was an important thing for downtowns. But as our market changes and the areas changes, I think it's a good time to look at that, so, yeah.
Thanks. All right, any other comments on this topic or
Ms.
any other?
Kinsey, oh, sorry, Ms. Kinsey has her hand raised on the Zoom.
Commissioner Kinsey, go ahead.
Thanks. I don't have a comment about this topic that we're talking about, but I do have another report from the work that I get to do with the Bloomington Monroe County Metropolitan Planning Organization. If you're ready for a new line of conversation here.
Yes, please proceed.
Great. So as I get to represent the Plan Commission on the Bloomington Monroe County Metropolitan Planning Organization, and I too wanted to bring an issue that was raised in the context of that meeting to both staff and our commission's attention that I think is really relevant. And it's about some federal highway electric vehicle infrastructure plans. And what I found most interesting about these planning documents that were being discussed at that MPO meeting is the requirements for vehicle charging stations. And as we continue to incorporate vehicle charging stations in a variety of different building plans, I think it's important for us to know what type and level of electric vehicle charging those units have, because it makes a difference. And there's some federal highway plans around that. And I just think that at some point it would be a really important issue for the maybe the staff to share and expand our information on it in terms of helping us keep track of both the types of electric vehicle charging stations we have required as part of building and parking garages and other places in town, and then to also be a little bit more forward thinking about assuring that we're sufficiently equipping those areas with the right levels of charging stations. So it's really just a point of information, but I thought it was really an important one for the next time we see a building plan or a site plan that includes electrical vehicle charging. That's it.
Thank you, Commissioner Kinsey. Looks like Director Robinson maybe has something to add.
Thank you, Commissioner Whistler and Kinsey, for bringing that to our attention. I just do want to kind of provide an additional comment. We've had the private sector respond to private vehicle charging stations. I've had a couple companies work with staff in trying to implement those, not so much on the level or type, but just trying to respond to market conditions. So that is something, again, we're looking at. I will say in one particular instance, this vendor, third-party vendor, is really interested in to implement charging stations, but one of the things that runs their program is through advertising and essentially signage. That is one thing that we're having to look at. So that's a challenge of balancing that kind of demand in public versus private. Their model really drives a very large digital TV screen in front of each charging station. That's something our code doesn't allow, but that's something that other communities have used to kind of leverage that support. So just wanted to provide that context of what else is going on that we're hearing from maybe the private sector rather than the federal programs that we're looking at. So thanks for that opportunity.
Thank you. Are there any additional reports or communications from commissioners or staff? All right, seeing none, we will move on to our petitions then. Our first petition this evening is ZO 40-22. Again, the petitioner is Monroe County Government, and this is a request for a map amendment, rezone. And I believe Jackie Scanlon is going to present the case for us tonight. Or maybe...
I am going to, Mr. Robinson's going to start us off here.
Again, Scott Robinson, Director of Planning and Transportation. I just wanted to take a quick opportunity to give a context to the request and the staff's position on this request. I don't want the community to feel like that we're being unfair to the county and their request. This is certainly a very challenging request. The county is moving forward. This is a situation that I know the petitioner has demonstrated the need, the current site of the jail and the need to address that. However, I just want to make it clear that staff is using the planning documents that we have to make our recommendation. That should not be a reflection upon the county's desire to address community corrections and moving forward in that progressive nature. There are a number of questions that remain unanswered, and I don't think this is a position for the Plan Commission to try to decide those decisions tonight. This is a conversation that needs to be had, perhaps at a larger level at City Council. It's something that, again, that the administration and the staff seeks to work with the county to find an appropriate location, the desire to keep it within the downtown or within the community, and I think that's part of the reason the county has chosen the site is to try to find it within the city. But again, I just want to stress that when staff reviewed this request, we're looking at our comprehensive plan, and the guidance that we have doesn't really address how to address what the petitioner is seeking tonight. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Scanlon for the staff report. But I do encourage plan commissioners to make a decision tonight to forward on to City Council so that can be considered, because I understand the county is under some kind of time constraints for the decision on the property option. So with that, Ms. Scanlon, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay. Oops. Okay, so we are looking, again, this evening, we saw this last month, at the property at the northwest corner of Fullerton and Interstate 69 / State Road 37. The property is 87.12 acres. It's currently zoned mixed-use employment, and the comprehensive plan designation is Employment Center and I-69 interchange. You can see the property's vacant. It is surrounded by, there is quarry, active quarry to the east, and then there is an old quarry to the north, as well as development further north of office and single family, and then obviously single family to the west across the highway. The request before you is a map amendment, otherwise known as a rezone, from mixed-use employment, ME, to mixed-use institutional, MI. The history of this site is, as I said, it's currently undeveloped. It was used as a borrow site for I-69 construction, so Plan Commission, a previous iteration of the Plan Commission actually saw the petition when it was zoned plan unit development and allowed the site to be, the topsoil on the site to be used for I-69. So the comprehensive plan designation, as I mentioned, is Employment Center, also part of one of our I-69 and interchange focus areas. The comprehensive plan envisions employment centers that will allow Bloomington to keep pace with the changing economy, which is the main purpose of the district, as part of the purpose statement for this area. So some concerns that we discussed last time, and then 2 additional concerns that have been added to the staff report. Environmental considerations. This site does have a number of environmentally restricted areas based on the Unified Development Ordinance, so including closed canopy areas as well as slope and some potential karst features. So those were identified, again, with the previous petition that I mentioned related to I-69 and have been, I believe, recorded as areas that will be set aside. So making sure that those areas stay safe, as well as the effects of development near those areas on the surrounding areas that they drain to. Access we discussed, we talked about, obviously, there will be vehicular access here. Whether or not there could be future transit access is a question. And there isn't currently Bloomington transit access here. Rural transit was mentioned at the last hearing. There are limits to what rural transit can do inside of city limits. So I believe the petitioner indicated that they felt that their conversations with Bloomington Transit were positive, that something could be done here if a facility were to be built. So that's something that we do have some concern about and feel that the area would need to be served by transit, especially because it isn't in a very walkable, accessible by walking area. Site design, we talked about last time, you do not have to have a site design for a map amendment. That is something we often see, a general site design, so that Plan Commission and then Council can have a general idea of what would be done here, especially in this type of request where it's a very purpose-driven map amendment request, where they're obviously requesting the map amendment for a particular use. So we have not been able to see that. And then the comprehensive plan, as I mentioned before, and I'll speak briefly about these again in a moment. Two assumptions that were raised at the last hearing. We explored a little bit more in the report this time. The first being site size assumptions. So we have received various letters or correspondence from the petitioner with different indicating that they need different numbers of acreage in order to be able to develop the type of facility that they would like to at this location. So that has ranged from anywhere from 20 to over 40 acres, as well as the development being described as the jail first with potential supportive ancillary uses later in the future. And so those things are kind of up in the air, which is fine, except they're being used as a basis for saying that there are not very many places in the community where this particular use could go because of the size constraints. So it's kind of, that's been a little confusing for staff to be able to address the size constraint issue because it's unclear how much space is actually needed. So that's something that we talked about a little bit in the staff report. For example, the Thompson PUD, which was mentioned last time, was amended by council in 2002 at the request of the county to allow jails at that location as a conditional use. So that location is also an 85-acre tract, still owned by the county and still zoned for jail as an option there. And then, we were able to look up a number of other counties in the last, I would say 3, maybe 4 years, have either built facilities or plan to build them, often because at the instigation of the state, which is what Monroe County is doing. And a number of them have been able to build adequate facilities at smaller acreage than what is being requested here. So not having a lot of detail about exactly what is needed kind of makes it hard to for us to be able to discuss whether or not there really is limited space in the community for this type of use. And the second assumption I would say that came up, mentioned by the petitioner at the October hearing, is that the facility needs to be located within the corporate boundaries in order to satisfy the city. I do think that obviously the current location of the jail facility and its supportive services, they are located in the heart of downtown right now, and discussing moving those it's only responsible to discuss what kind of impact that will have on the downtown. That's something that was done when the Thompson PUD petition came through in 2002. That was discussed at that time. If those facilities were to move to South Rogers, what would that mean? So that is something that I do think we think needs to be probably explored more, but we haven't been really involved in any discussions. This is the first that we as the city really have seen about discussions for location of a new facility. So again, making that kind of difficult to analyze when we're making a recommendation to this body. So briefly again, here's a map of the environmental constraints. The area of 12% or less slope is roughly 30 acres. At this site, the petitioner has indicated that they might need more than 40 acres. Not sure which uses or supportive facilities wouldn't make it onto the site if they were to have this site and not be able to develop as much as they said, or if they can actually develop it at a smaller size, in which case are there other locations available some questions were raised there. Again, with access, of course, Fullerton going through now, and obviously being immediately next to the highway, vehicular access will be fine. It's more thinking about pedestrian and bicycle access as well as transit access. What does that actually look like for the future, especially if there are going to be supportive services out here for people of all walks of life in our community? Can they all actually access this location in the way that downtown is accessible now via Bloomington Transit? Something that we talked about briefly as well, there are roadway connections required in the transportation plan. That is not something that is typically compelled, or that is not something that is compelled initially through a map amendment process to plat and build that road, but were there to be a subdivision in the future, that would need to happen. And how it's hard to assess whether or not that will still be possible because we haven't been able to see any sort of site plan. So again, I went over the comprehensive plan issues briefly earlier. This is the site located here at the southern end of the city, at the southern end of an employment center designation. And basically, employment center background and intent, what you would think of as an employment center, hoping for a mixed use of office, light and high-tech manufacturing, quality job creation. These are the types of, this is the intent of this district in the comprehensive plan, which is our land use guiding document. So concerned that this specific map amendment request away from employment, which is the current designation, mixed use employment, to institutional, will actually limit what uses can go here, and that even the particular, if this does end up being used for a jail, is that particular use meeting these goals from the comprehensive plan. And again, some information from the background and intent for the interchanges section, wanting, wanting these areas to have significant employment and commercial, they wanting them to be, again, premier entry points into Bloomington. Will this rezone help meet these goals? So the MI district, as says in the report, does actually have less commercial opportunity than the existing ME. So we are a little concerned about that as well. Commercial employment and multifamily uses along the corridor offer opportunities to reimagine and redevelop with the goal of attracting and retaining employers, employees, and residents. So looking for these areas to be kind of mixed use seems to be one of the goals of the comprehensive plan. So the findings, are in the report that we have to weigh when we're looking at map amendment requests. The request is compliant with the UDO because the request is just asking to change the map. So it's not something that we look at technical requirements of the UDO like we would with a site plan. So that's not the issue. The main issue here is whether or not this request is in line with the comprehensive plan. And for some of the reasons that I've listed, we are finding it hard, we're finding it difficult to say that it is in line with the comprehensive plan. We, of course, recognize that the community, that the county has expressed that the community has a need for such a facility, and that there are certain things that it needs to be a certain size and potentially located within the city. But we're not sure, there hasn't been a lot of background information supplied about those things as the kind of base for making this decision that clearly doesn't seem in line with the comprehensive plan, which is our guiding document for this type of petition. So kind of, as Director Robinson said, we of course understand that there are practical and necessary needs for changes to the criminal justice system here and all across the country, and that the county is trying to work toward addressing those issues. And that one of the ways they're trying to do that is a new and updated jail facility, and then potentially having area for wraparound services as well, which is great. However, the department is concerned that we haven't been presented with enough information to be able to justify a map amendment request of this nature. Again, it's zoned mixed-use employment. The comprehensive plan designation is employment, employment services, and they are already quite in line. And so to change this to institutional as a purpose-driven rezone is not something that we're comfortable recommending approval on because we don't think that the comprehensive plan supports that. And as we've talked about before, a rezone isn't just for one use. So if you recommend approval and the council decides to rezone this property, it will be rezoned whether or not they build a jail here or not. So all of the things the comprehensive plan foresaw for this location, many of those become more difficult under the district that they're requesting. I will say, I will add, in the report, it indicated that they said that a phase 1 and a phase 2 had been done, environmental studies, also geotechnical report, and I believe one other. I did get emails from, we didn't receive any of that in time to send to you. I did get 2 emails from Mr. Cockrell today with some of that information. So that is not something that you have on your plate to be able to weigh. I was out most of the day with sick people at home, so I did not get those to you in the hour here before Plan Commission. So that information is available and will go on to the council if you are to make a recommendation to send it to them tonight. So again, the petitioner has demonstrated that they feel that there's a need for a new facility, but there remain significant concerns about the assumptions that are made for this petition and the lack of a community-wide conversation about the impact of this particular map amendment. We do also, again, have basic technical concerns about whether or not this map amendment is in line with the comprehensive plan, and as well as what the implications are for the desired use and its lack of transit access at this location. So the department is recommending to the Plan Commission that based on the findings of fact in the report, that you forward ZO 40-22 to the Common Council with a negative recommendation. I can answer any questions.
Thank you. Is there a representative of the petitioner who would like to make a statement tonight?
Hey, good evening. I'm Julie Thomas, Monroe County Board of Commissioners, and I just want to say thanks to the staff and thank you to all of you for hearing this tonight. I'll be brief, and Mr. Cockrell has some additional information to offer you. So we don't have an option, and we must build a facility. That's an important statement I need to make at the outset. Our focus is on community justice reform. Treatment over incarceration is key for us. Of course, the judges play a big role in that. And we have a focus on keeping people out of the criminal justice system as well as reducing recidivism. We have spent a lot of time in study teams visiting various facilities across Indiana. We spent time in Kentucky. A group is going out to Ohio on Friday. So we are learning from others. And we always ask the question, what would you do differently if you could do it over again? And we're learning a lot, and we're taking that all into account as we move forward. We have a lot of decisions to make on the Community Justice Reform Committee. One of the things I do want to point out is because Fullerton Pike has not been developed yet, the road is not there yet, that it might be difficult to imagine what that area is going to look like when that roadway connects, because that will connect South Walnut to I-69. And I also do want to point out the fact that our next options are going to be within the county, but outside the city limits. So I wanted to make those points and hand it over to Mr. Cockrell. Thank you.
Jeff Cockrell. I'm the county attorney. I believe planning staff has my email and telephone already, so I will neglect to put that in there. I just want to thank you guys for being here tonight, and I also want to thank you for the conversation we had last month. I thought it was a really good conversation, and so I think I'm going to start with things which I left the meeting thinking we all agreed with, and then get into some of the other points. I thought we all agreed that the county does indeed need to replace the current facility. And in order to, if we don't, we're going to have trouble with the federal courts in the long run. So I think that's something that we agreed to. I thought we agreed that, and maybe this is where I was wrong, is that currently there are no sites within the city of Bloomington that is zoned jail as a conditional, that is zoned for a jail as a conditional site, and that meets the county size requirements. Now, I understand that the Thompson site is something that has a PUD associated with it where this could be built. We had some conversation last month about how that had been requested by Catalent for your employment growth, and I think employment's important, and I'm glad that's being mentioned here. In addition, if that didn't go through, I think that we had conversations about using that for some kind of housing projects, affordable housing, workforce housing, and that was a better spot because the area had grown to include a much more dense housing and much more neighborhood around it, and that was one of the things the county wanted to avoid as we moved forward. I think we all agree that transportation to and from this site is going to be really important. I think that's one of the reasons that the county commissioner had indicated that it's critical for our use, and that if we had conversations with Bloomington Transit for looking at this site, and they indicated a willingness to work with us, but if for whatever reason that didn't fall through, that was a burden that the county was going to have to take on and make sure occurs. So I agree that transportation, as far as Bloomington Transit to the site, and I'd also agree with what Commissioner Thomas just said. It's hard to envision it, but once the Fullerton Pike project is completed, it'll have bicycle lanes all the way from Walnut and essentially hitting with some of the trail systems, Beeline and those trails, so all the way downtown it would be accessible by bike. And I think we all agreed that we didn't want the new facility to affect neighborhoods. And so that's one of the reasons we looked at this site and came to the conclusion. I did also hear some comments and concerns at the last meeting and some through the staff recommendations that we saw in the report. I think the biggest one is the employment aspect, right? This has been an employment zone, and we're changing to a different zone. I guess my first statement is I spoke with the person selling us the property, and they've had this property for 38 years and have been marketing it for 38 years, and it's still vacant. So I think that says something to the attractiveness of the site. We find it attractive probably for reasons that some people wouldn't. I would also say that if we did the current facility, just the correction facility with the sheriff's department, we would have that under our current budget, we would have 128 employees with a payroll of annual salaries over $7 million. If we included some of the other people on the block of the current justice building, which would include courts, probation, public defender, prosecutor, and I'm not saying this is going to happen. I think it's kind of one of those things that we're still having really intense conversations about at the county level. And there's a financial component to that would make it difficult to move those all out at once as well. Then you're looking at 270 positions approximately with a approximate annual salary of $17 million. So, we understand that you guys want this for an employment zone. We think that we're going to provide employment. And I would also just note that doesn't include any of these other things that we're talking about. I think that our Community Justice Reform Committee is looking at a detox facility. It's looking at mental health facilities. It's looking at supportive housing facilities, and those would also have jobs and other things associated with it. We also think that the employment zone should help foster a business community, and we think that these kind of programs would go a long way towards helping local businesses as well. And then I think the biggest question that I heard I think transit's the biggest question, right? But other than that, there was comments about the sizing of the property. When we started looking at property, we were looking at roughly a 25-acre site because we thought that would be enough to build the current facility and then also add the ability to expand that or expand it or replace that in 30 years, which we don't have with our downtown facility, right? I want this legacy of this purchase to not require the person who comes after me to have to go through the same struggle of looking for property. So I think that's a part of it. And so the engineers who design jails and who design jails across the state told us 25 acres was the recommended requirement. That's not to say we couldn't build it on a smaller size, but that is their recommendation. I guess my feeling is that when we're looking at the current facility with the ability not to have to look for property in 30, 40 years, along with all these other items, I think that's where this acreage makes sense. 25 as a recommended site is a recommendation, you know. But if you say, look at all these other things that we are going to want to accomplish, having more, and that's where the 20 to 40 acre come into, because we're going through the process of trying to prioritize what can we do, what can we afford to do, what would have the most bang for the buck for the community as far as these supportive services, and we haven't come to that conclusion yet. And so that conclusion has to be reached. My guess is that we could probably fill 40 acres with what we would be things on the priorities list, but we're going to have to prioritize differently. And some of the things we're talking about maybe doesn't belong on the same footprint as this facility, the initial facility. So, you know, those are all things that are being discussed, and as we move forward, I would say, and I would say when we did the search, this was, again, I don't think this is something new. This was the only area in the city limits that we thought fit the model. We have not heard of any other property that within the city limits that fit our requirements. So we think that's important. I also want to talk a little bit about, you know, the gateway and those kind of ideas. And I do it to say, we issued an RFQ for design consultants to help us through this. Now, we did not indicate what property or anything like that, but clearly we kind of we're hoping that this is a fit. And so in our RFQ goals, we included the area should be attractive, inviting to residents, visitors, and serve as a gateway to the city of Bloomington. I think we are putting that task on ourselves. We're putting that task on our designers, that's one of our goals of this project. And I think that's one of the criteria that we're looking at. It also includes that we're going to master plan the entire property. We haven't done a site design for a variety of reasons. One is we're not there in our process. We can't do a master plan site design because we have not gotten through our process yet to determine things that are necessary for a site design. Two, we're a governmental entity and we're dealing with taxpayer dollars, and we think that expense is something that we should at least get from the city, that yes, this is an appropriate place to do that before we start doing a site design for that area. And, you know, and I guess my process mind says, you know, that's kind of how the process is supposed to work. We're supposed to make sure it's okay to utilize this property in this way, and then once we find that out, then we go through the process of, you know, how do we make this site work with the other requirements? You know, it doesn't make sense to do all that other work prior to that when in this case. Because we realize, and I think everybody's alluded to it, this is kind of a big question, is whether this site is appropriate. And, you know, I'm going to be available for you guys to ask questions. I think we had a really good conversation last month, so I don't really see a whole lot other than to close with, you know, We did walk the site with the property owners to the north, Mr. Campbell and Mr. Cutchell. So we got to see firsthand, and they have some drainage concerns that we don't have a designer yet. Again, the RFQs are due actually tomorrow. So when we get that in place, we're going to make sure that they are aware of those concerns, and we do what we can to mitigate it. And I think that's what the site design process is for. But also, I think the question before you guys tonight is this: whether the City Plan Commission believes that the jail belongs within city limits or not. I think that's what this question boils down to in my mind. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from commissioners, either for staff or for the petitioner? Commissioner Smith, go ahead.
I know one of the, will you address Ms. Scanlon's concerns about the different sizes, the site size? I know that seemed to be something that, it bothered her in her department. So,
Well, and I understand why it would bother them, because I think we are asking for a map amendment to encapsulate what we know is the first use, right? We know what we want our first use to be, but we also have other ideas of what the remaining portions of the property could be used for. So, if we have a engineering recommend 25 acres, I think that sets our minimum requirements. But then we also have other things that are acknowledged in our criminal justice studies, such as a detox center, such as supportive housing, such as mental health. And I don't think even the mental health needed to be in any report for us to realize that as a society, it's not just here, that mental health is a problem, and how we react to it is currently inadequate. So I think, those are the kind of things we really want to explore. We want to be able to have space for, whether that's out here. I think there's also some comments on how we could redevelop our property downtown. And I guess in my mind, that's kind of premature, seeing how we don't know what pieces are going to fall out there. Are we going to move any of the other uses in the justice components of the county out there or not? I mean, those are still open questions, right? Those are part of this bigger community conversation that our Community Justice Reform Committee is working on and trying to get answers to. So, I mean, part of the confusion, if there is, if you will, is that, we found a property that we think is really situated well for the initial facility, right? We think we know it has more land than is necessary for that facility. What other pieces of what we need to do to effectuate change and make our community better needs to go out there? That's part of an ongoing conversation, and probably will be for a bit of time. Did I answer your question?
yes, I think you did. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Other questions? Commissioner Cochran.
So, Mr. Cockrell, could you talk a little bit more about the land south of Catalin? I realize that you guys have a potential of doing employment growth there, which is real. I mean, we've got an employer there that's expanding. I understand that if for some reason that were to become available, I mean, is there any other reasons that site would not be suitable for a jail?
Well, I guess, in my opinion, yes. There are kind of quite a few. One is the city has just made a tremendous investment in the Switchyard Park. There are other couple city park facilities next to that. That area has developed immensely with, since it was purchased in 2002, there's a lot more housing out there. I know that the Habitat for Humanity is building their Osage place there. These aren't necessarily things when we explore properties that we necessarily want to be neighbors to this type of facility. I think your planning code kind of indicates that when it makes a conditional use for this type of facility in two zoning areas that are kind of hard to find, right? I think that is intentional, and I think I said last month, I don't fault anybody for it, because even though I'm not necessarily in agreement that this type of facility is a bad neighbor, I can't fault anybody for having that initial reaction, right? So I don't fault that. So, I think that is kind of a key. I think the other key is, when Catalent was talking to the city and the county about their expansion, it was a big, and it still is a big deal. I mean, it was a huge investment in our community. It's a lot of promised job growth. The county had committed to not do anything with that property, essentially to give them a 2-year window to kind of come through and say, hey, yes, we want it, because we want to. When we started the conversation, it was they wanted to build a building there and put a couple of new lines, which meant, I think that it was like 150 or 200 jobs per line that would come in there. And we thought that was a pretty good use of that property, much better than what we're talking about now. Even before that, I think we had switched from looking at that as a correctional facility, mostly because of the growth around it, to something that would be better used for housing. I know I've had conversations with some city staff about the potential of a residential TIF in that area, and those kind of uses. I think that is a better utilization of that property, and you guys are the city planning commission, so I'm just telling you what I think. It's kind of in your bailiwick to make those kind of decisions and determinations, and you could tell me I'm crazy. But those are kind of the thoughts that I have on, and the county has on that property.
Good. All right. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner St. John.
Thank you very much. It's really interesting to hear what you have to share. So I wanted to ask about the supportive services that one of you talked about having there on site, hopefully. So are those supportive services that would just be used in your anticipation by people who are incarcerated in the jail, or would they be services that non-incarcerated people would go to?
I think the goal of everything we're doing is to keep people out of the system. So I'm not on the committee that's looking at this, and I don't know if either of you, but I think the goal is to keep people out of the system and to support them once they get out of the facility, right? So I would anticipate that the vast majority of those services would be for people not in the facility itself. I think it's much more of transitioning out and trying to figure out how to keep them from ever going in, because we realize, one, the better job we do with those two aspects lets us lower the amount of space we need, lower our cost, have more people working, have a much more cohesive and working society. So those are the goals, and I don't want to be critical of anybody in the past, but I think those goals have really changed a lot in probably the last 5 to 10 years. I wasn't here 15 years, well, I was with the county, but I wasn't working on these kind of issues that long ago. But it really feels like, particularly when in 17, 18, it really started to build momentum, that needing to do a lot more of these types of things. I know our probation staff and our community correction staff has been on board with that for probably 3 decades. It's just, I think it's just becoming a bigger issue, and I think as we move forward, particularly as we see more of the effects of the COVID-19 or pandemic, I think we're going to be thankful if we have a lot more of those kind of services available than if we don't.
Yeah, I agree that obviously keeping people out, hopefully they don't ever have to go in. I was really more asking about the practicality of having them located there for the whole community when transportation is an issue. So you take something that's located downtown now that one would consider a supportive service that is used both by the jail and by people in the community, and then move the whole thing out there so that it is available for people who are either coming out of incarceration or are not going in at all, and then it's hard to get to, or they're split into two, which also doesn't seem like a really great idea. So I'm just wondering about the practicality of that. And then that all ties back, of course, then to the space question.
Well, and I'm going to answer briefly, and then I'll let Commissioner Jones answer. I think there are some things that have value when they're not near the jail. I think there is some programming and things like that. And like I said, one of the things I read in the report was that we are going to redevelop our assets downtown as we do this move. That's all part of that conversation of what should go out there, what shouldn't, what types of uses should go out there and what shouldn't. So I understand that. I would also say that, if we found a spot downtown, I think we'd be talking about it, right? I mean, yes, that's a great thing to have, and I think we would all have preferred it, but it's just not there.
Good evening. I'm Commissioner Lee Jones. I'm the chairman of the Community Justice Reform Committee. And we've had many discussions about many different ways to approach these problems. But one of the things that we're looking into seriously, that the state is actually heavily supporting and has even indicated interest in us working on it, is creating a regional mental health hospital or facility there that would be probably both inpatient and outpatient. So that would be something, and this is by no means a definitive plan yet. This is just one of the many things we're discussing. We do believe that there's a very strong need for a regional community mental health system, and should we be able to pursue that, this would be a good location for it. We don't yet know what could happen with it, but that is one of the uses that we're thinking of. We've also talked about transitional housing, and that's something that it's not clear that it would be appropriate for that to take place on that site. It might be better for that to be located elsewhere. A detox center as being separated from the jail, but at that site, would be very valuable, so that people in detox don't just automatically go into jail. So anyhow, those are just some of the other issues and uses that we've discussed, and as Mr. Cockrell has made clear, we're still in discussions and do not have final plans yet. And we do hope to hear from the community the direction in which we should move. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? Go ahead.
My question is, again, just so we don't lose sight of this, why is this discussion taking place and how has this precipitated to this meeting today?
Well, I think that the ultimate answer to that is in 2008, we entered into an agreed order with the Indiana Civil Liberties Union because of the status of our jail and the overcrowding in our facility. We're still under an agreed order in 2000, I think it was 18, but potentially, I think it was 2018. The ICLU said, we think you're using this agreed order as a crutch not to take action. And so we'll continue it, but only if you guys do a study of your system to determine whether or not what you're doing meets standards, meets constitutional standards. So we went through a process. We actually had 2 different consultants, which I thought is, at the time, and I still think was the right thing to do. One looked at our current criminal justice system internal to the county, which included the facility. One looked at the community gaps that we have as a community for criminal justice kind of ideas. And the facility one basically said, you cannot meet, you routinely can't meet your constitutional level of care, which is not a good thing. And that's, once we got that report, we started looking for property, and we looked around, and we came up with, I think, 3 finalists. This one was the only one in the city limits. We prioritized this for a lot of reasons. I think, I know at least one of you had toured the site with us, and you could see the wooded area. They talked about the environmental concerns. A lot of those things were the reasons we picked this site. We wanted the buffer of the trees. We wanted the canopy there. We think that sense of nature is important. But that's kind of how we got here, right? We got here because our facility is failing, and it's failing in a way that potentially harms people, right? And we want to correct that failing and get a facility in place that affords, I would say a constitutional level of care is a fairly low bar. I think we want to be a little higher than that, but we at least want to meet that constitutional level of care.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Kinsey, I see you've got your hand raised.
Thank you. Yes, I have a question that I think it goes to staff. And I think I want to characterize first our obligation here and what we're responsible for. And for me, this is a question about assuring that we are following the comp plan and that this aligns with the UDO, or is it aligned with the comp plan? And I'm concerned about how Councilor Cockrell just kind of essentially boiled this down to the issue of if we believe the jail should be in the city. And I don't think it's quite as simple as that. Well, I think that's an attractive proposition, just to imagine that this is about whether the jail should be in the city or not. That's really not our purview. And so I want to clarify that with staff's help. And I also want to think about what the impact of this map amendment is a little bit more deeply. And my question is, if we forward this with a positive recommendation to the city council and the city council agrees and it gets changed to MI, what happens if the jail goes south and that's not a use? This property would then be granted MI, and that would be it. It would then have to comply with that as a new amended map. Can the staff say, I mean, one, did I play that out right? And what's the impact? And is that the only impact, that it stays MI forever now because that's what we would have approved?
Sure, thank you. So yes, to your first question, yes. So Mr. Cockrell ended his initial testimony by saying, it's up to the Plan Commission about whether or not the jail belongs in city limits. That is not the purview of the Plan Commission. The purview of the Plan Commission is whether or not any petition is in line with the documents that are community supported, including the Unified Development Ordinance, Transportation Plan, and ultimately the Comprehensive Plan. In a map amendment, we're looking at the Comprehensive Plan mostly. So that is what your role is. We do understand it's a complicated process. Obviously, this commission is appointed by various parts of government. It's political in some ways, but ultimately, our preference as staff, as a department, is that the recommendation we make to you, and hopefully the recommendation you make to the council, is based on the comprehensive plan, because that's how we treat all map amendments. We want to treat them all the same. We don't want to set precedent that we're changing the way we analyze map amendment requests for XYZ, whatever those reasons may be. So they're asking to have a map amendment. We look at the findings for map amendment. A number of the findings are weighted for the comprehensive plan. We don't think it's meeting the comprehensive plan to make this amendment. We're recommending denial. It is complicated as a wider issue, so will those things be addressed by council differently? It's possible, and we don't have purview, over that. We will make a they will know our recommendation through your recommendation. Your second question was, I didn't write it down, I only wrote down the first one. Sorry. Can you repeat that, Ms. Kinsey?
Yes, it is about the kind of the longer term
yes.
impact of the map amendment.
Sure. So yes, a map amendment will not go away. So if we as a community, if the council decides to amend the map and change this to MI, then it is MI, whether or not a jail is built here or not. So that would change. If someone wanted to do another map amendment and change it to another district, they could do that afterward. But if this were changed to MI, jail is a conditional use in MI, so in order to have that use, then the county would have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeals and meet the conditional use requirements for that use. If something happened along the way, it sounds like there's still kind of a lot up in the air based on Mr. Cockrell's testimony, and they decide not to use this site, now we will have rezoned it MI. And so a large portion of what we currently have as employment in the comprehensive plan will now not really be zoned in line with that future land use designation.
Thank you. That's helpful. And you sort of answered my next question at the end there, because I was going to ask, just to make sure we're all clear on the fact that the MI option, well, let me just frame it this way. The only option for the use, jail or detention center, is MI conditional. And I think I read, at least when I looked at allowable uses, the EM non-residential.
So yes.
I'm not sure how to read those columns that are to the far right in the allowable use table.
So the EM district still exists in the text that was in the old map, and they could also have requested to rezone to that district as well. So jails are allowed in both districts, and then in any plan unit developments like the Thompson, where they have already been written in, which I believe that's the only one, but yeah, just those 3 districts.
Okay. And then the last part of that same question is, then the conditional use, let's say it goes to the council, it becomes agreed upon, then it would go to BZA for approval of the conditional use of jail, because it still is a conditional use. It's not a permitted use, even in MI. It's
Correct.
not permitted.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so this could get stopped at that point as well.
If they can't meet the requirements for conditional use approval, then the Board of Zoning Appeals would not be able to approve it. That's correct. I don't know. We haven't done an analysis of whether or not we think that would be, easy or hard, or we haven't looked at that.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that it still is a conditional use, even in that, even if the map amendment goes through, it's not permitted. Yeah.
Correct, and it is conditional in the Thompson as well. So it's conditional in any of the options.
Everywhere.
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that line of questioning, assuming that this went through and was rezoned to MI, and then the county fails to move forward, fails to close on the property, fails to begin construction, fails to whatever reason, fails to move forward with the plan to construct a jail, is there any reason that we couldn't, at that point, initiate action with this body to rezone it back to ME? Would we need?
I'll say that technically no, but Mike can correct me, Mr. Rooker can correct me if I'm wrong. I'll make this comment, which is that we would hope that the findings for a map amendment are related to the district, not the use. So if we think MI is appropriate here, It shouldn't matter whether or not they're going to build the jail. If we think that it is in line with the comprehensive plan, then that won't change, even if the plans for what they're developing here change. That's why it's complicated, because we know what the future thing is going to be, but really for a map amendment, it should just be, oh, this district makes sense, just as much or more than the district that's already there. I could see why they want to change it. Yes, we're recommending approval. That would be our preference would be that no, we wouldn't then come back and say, oh, we just made this MI, but now we want to put it back.
But that's a preference,
That
not
would be a
a,
staff preference, correct. So Mr. Ricker can correct me if I'm wrong. I think you could initiate that.
Yeah, that's Michael Rooker, city attorney, that's correct. A rezone of this site would not preclude subsequent rezone, I guess, if you want to say that. If that's your question.
and we could initiate that ourselves. That wouldn't need to be brought by petitioner, the property owner, et cetera.
Petitioner, an independent party can initiate a rezone, so can the planning commission. That's correct.
Thank you. Okay, additional questions from commissioners. Commissioner Smith, go ahead.
So I went out as a member of the Plan Commission and toured the site with Mr. Cockrell and some other members, a couple members of City Council as well. And there were some members of the jail there, staff. And, my view is none of us like jails. We've heard some people before saying, they were against it. None of us like jails. So, this gives us an opportunity, in my mind, for a progressive approach to this, to this need in our community, and I'm sorry that we have that need in our community, but it does give us a long-term way to become more progressive and more humane and have a better system. The comprehensive plan, and Ms. Scanlon, you can correct me, it's guidelines. It's not a legal requirement.
The findings of fact in the Unified Development Ordinance say whether or not something is in line with the comprehensive plan. That's a legal requirement.
And is what we're talking about subject to interpretation?
Oh, I'm sorry, you'd have to be more specific. What do you mean what we're talking about?
Whether it meets the comprehensive plan.
Yes, and if this body has other findings that indicate that it meets the comprehensive plan, you all can propose those.
So, I had some discussions with other staff members, and going to change it to an MI, it does allow, if this is the site and the body that I'm sitting on now, approves it or not, whatever but if it does allow the project to begin moving forward. And I think that this is an issue that, as Mr. Cockrell said, we've been under a consent decree from 2008, and the jail's overcrowded. And it will give us a future-oriented look at corrections. And so, when I was out there on that site tour, people were pretty excited about the different ideas about what a good thing it could be as far as this service and this to our community and people who have been incarcerated or who may be incarcerated. And I'm not an expert in all this, but I heard all these voices and, so I felt pretty good with, thinking about it, that moving ahead with it as an MI designation would be good. And so I just wanted to say that, and I did ask my one question.
Okay, yeah, let's keep this to questions.
Thank you.
We'll have another opportunity for
Thank you.
comment.
Thank you.
Are there any
Yeah, we
other-
pontificate, don't we? Yeah.
Sometimes you have to set up the question with a comment, but let's try to keep it to questions. Commissioner Burrell, please.
So I am very sympathetic with the project, with Monroe County project for the new jail. I do have a question, though, and the question is, why are we looking at rezoning this piece of property right now? Are you in a process of purchasing the place, and you have to make sure that you can get the rezone? And I'm just trying to, it feels like we are 3 steps ahead of what the conversation should be at this point with the people of Bloomington and Monroe County. And I understand because you are in the project and you see the project, and we are not seeing the whole picture. And that's why I'm asking, why are we doing the rezoning right away? Is it because of a purchase that it's imminent? Or something else?
And I guess, yes, I mean, we do have a purchase agreement out there. It is contingent upon having this in a zone that would allow the construction of this type of facility. I mean, I find it a little ironic that we're 3 steps behind in a conversation when, as the county, I can tell you that, this is probably, that study we did in 19 was probably the 2nd or 3rd study of a new facility since I got to the county. And, a lot of them were focused on the Thompson site. So I hear what you're saying, that it's a new conversation. I could tell you that on the county side, it's a really old conversation that has finally gained traction. So I think what made it gain that kind of traction is and I agree with Mr. Smith, nobody likes building a jail. Nobody likes building this type of facility. But why we're gaining some traction is, 1, we've seen what happens in Vigo County if the federal courts get involved. 2, we think we can, and we're working on a plan that's more than just a new correctional facility. I think we're trying to, as the county, when I say we, I'm talking the county and the county elected officials, are trying to revamp the system to allow for the correction and the correction of people as found in the state constitution to actually mean something in this community. I think there was some conversations about the comp plan, and I think you look at the visions of that comp plan, you can see 4 or 5 things within that vision that really strike and are directly related to this project. I mean, I think that was in last month's materials. I think there are a lot of ways that this is. But yes, this is caused by us having a purchase agreement. That is kind of the reason for the rush, is to, it expires at the end of the year, so we really need to get moving. And honestly, the other thing, the time sensitive is this is, we now have a report that says we're not meeting a constitutional level of care. And so we are trying to push forward. I think the thought is, we know we need a new facility, so let's go for it.
Well, I appreciate the answer. That answers my question, because that's what I assumed, that you were under contract and needed an answer. And I guess not time for comments yet, correct?
No, it is not time for comments yet. So
Okay,
if you have
thank you.
comments, we'll get to
Appreciate
those after the
your
public
answer.
comment.
Thank you.
All right. Look, I'm going to ask one more before we go, while we got you at the, or you have another question? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, go ahead, Commissioner.
So regarding the conclusion, in the first question regarding it's in our hands to recommend this to the council, and if it's in our hands to keep the jail in the city limits or not. But I can read lack of communication and conversation with several stakeholders that are very important. You mentioned last time and this time that you have had conversation with the Bloomington Transit, but the conclusion from the department regarding lack of communication or information with the downtown organizations about the redevelopment, also with the city and also with the community that might see this as an impact. I just wondering why this conversation hasn't been done, if this has taken long time of assessment, long time of decisions, and why in this moment I can read this about that lack of information and lack of conversation.
Well, and I think I'd answer that question this way. The current plan, if you can call it that, is to build a new correctional facility at this site. And that is going to involve moving about 128 employees. That doesn't involve opening up any buildings downtown or anything like that for redevelopment, right? I think particularly they're talking about redevelopment space. I don't think that will happen absent some financial windfall that I'm unaware of for a period of time. I mean, these projects and these facilities take time and resources, and I think at this point, we don't have the resources, even if we had made the decision that we were going to locate everybody out at that property, we don't have the bonding capability, in my opinion. Now, that might change when we get a designer in place who does better estimates, but I just don't see how that happens anytime in the next 5 years. So I understand that at some point, if we move all our, or empty any single building of employees and move them to this new facility, that we need to have a conversation with the community and the city on what do we do here? Unless we have a internal use of the county for that space. If we don't, then I think that opens up that conversation. It's just, I don't know how you have that conversation now. Does that make sense? I mean, I think down the road in the future, as we work through the master planning process, as we work through all those kind of processes for this, those communications and that conversation will evolve.
You have a question?
Yeah, maybe
Commissioner Seymour, go ahead.
following up a little bit on that question and answer, and I think I've heard it a couple times today, just a desire and a plan to have more engagement with the community, knowing you're here with the Plan Commission. I know we had really good dialogue last month on this topic. You mentioned that. I 100% agree. We're in that again today. But just, I guess, to help, we're in a tough spot where we're being asked to vote on something before the public engagement has really happened, at least as I understand it. And basically being asked to vote on something and being told if I don't vote for it, it means it won't happen in the city. And it feels like an ultimatum, and there's just so many unknowns. We don't know when things will move here, what may move here, what may happen with, so there's just a lot of unknowns. But talk about communication and dialogue, and appreciating that, but just when will that happen? And I know even last month, I think we had some dialogue, and I think I was told there would be some additional information presented that I don't think has been shared, at least to the level I was expecting. So I just, in a tough spot, and so wanting to understand the process and when those opportunities will be.
Well, I would say that those opportunities happen twice a month, and probably have happened twice a month for the last, since August of last year?
Oh, actually, it started in last October.
Yeah, last October, the county had started a group that had county council and county commissioners that met publicly noticed meetings, met Zoom option to meet, met to start talking about these. I think this summer, that group was expanded to include members of the Board of Judges, the sheriff, the prosecutor, the public defender, jail commander in our health department. Again, they meet twice a month on Monday, I think Monday at 4:30. And they're available via Zoom. Go to the www.co.monroe.in.us, look at our calendar, Given the holiday season, I'm guessing that some of the meetings may be on a little different days, but it should all be right there on the calendar, and it's the Community Justice Reform Committee. I have to think about that because when it was only the county commissioners and the county council, they had a different name. So at this point, I mean, they've been meeting and having this conversation for over a year. I think this is one of the great questions so that I can say, hey, everybody on the Plan Commission, everybody listening, everybody in the community, should attend those meetings because that's where this conversation is happening.
I guess truly appreciate that answer, and I guess just to follow up on it is has anybody from the city or city council or planning staff has been involved or a part of or invited to those conversations previously?
I can tell you I don't go to all those meetings, but the last one I was at, I think the deputy mayor was there, a member of the city council was there. I think that's right. I know I was at one they were both there. I don't go to, I'm not a regular attendee of those meetings, but I know that there have been cities elected officials who have, or appointed officials who have been at those meetings.
Okay, cool. And then, and maybe trying to focus again on the, because it's hard, but to focus on the what we're looking at today and what is in the purview. So I think at the last meeting, I think Commissioner Brad had asked the question about just the employment zone from the comprehensive plan and what other areas, if this was changed in zoning, just what other places in the city that could see a major new development happen. If it was just a really thought-provoking question, and so just wanting to come back to that and hearing more that, you know, we're talking about if this was rezoned and became the jail, about 120 employees. Just wanting an assessment from planning staff on, you know, how does that align with our comprehensive plan and what we should be looking at.
Sorry, will you repeat the question?
Sure, I guess just focusing on the comprehensive plan designation for this area being, I think, an employment zone or employment center, and just how putting a new use here that may have 120 to, I think, 270 employees, how does that mesh with that vision, and what other uses we're seeing in the city that have a similar designation?
Okay, I'll say, yeah, so talking about the number of employees, I mean, those are existing jobs that we have, right, downtown, and then they would be moved. So I think the comprehensive plan is envisioning new employment. It talks about high-tech employment, small scale, I think manufacturing. Hold on, let me just pull it up briefly. Yeah, so mix of office, light, high-tech manufacturing uses to provide quality employment opportunities, quality job creation. I think the idea would be that it would be new development here that would be creating new opportunity for employment, not necessarily just transplanted from existing location in the community. Did that answer your question?
It did, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Cochran.
So this is for the planning staff, you know, Mr. Robinson, Mrs. Scanlon. This piece of property, you know, has been there for 38 years. And obviously, I remember years ago when, you know, I-69 was coming in, you know, this was designated. The market for industrial, I mean, it's across the country, it's been huge because of COVID. You know, is there anything in the planning or in the code that you think has hindered the development of this property?
I can briefly answer, and Mr. Robinson can add if I'm missing a point. I think you've probably heard me say this before, we run into this where we don't always feel comfortable saying, we don't know why property sits fallow. We don't know necessarily how much, for example, the property owner has been asking. Are they willing to sit on that property until the right buyer comes along so that they can make as much as possible? You know, if it's no skin off their back to keep it. Obviously, he used it made money off of it during the building of I-69, sold a lot of topsoil to the state, had to do minimal remediation to the property in order to do that. So it was an income-generating property during that time. We have seen developments, proposals for this site, and then the property owner doesn't build them. Or whoever they have contracted with. So it's not that we haven't seen things proposed and approved for this location over time, we just haven't seen that built. Is that related to the connection of Fullerton? Possibly. Waiting for I-69 to come through. We have heard that from some developers, with properties along the highway, knowing that would maybe be potentially more impactful in the future. We can't really say why things haven't developed in the past, but I do think in this case, we have seen proposals be approved here, and we have seen it be used for income generation, obviously not the same as fully developing 87 acres. I don't think, and Mr. Robinson can correct me if I'm wrong, that we've seen any indication that there is some sort of legislative reason that it's not being developed. There's not some sort of rule that has hindered the development here.
Scott Robinson, Director of Planning and Transportation. I don't really have anything additional to add. I've been with the city since 2002, and I can say that this site has always been a topic of conversation about how the community is going to grow, and it continues to be. Whether it was dealing with interchanges in I-69, about the frontage road system, which is another requirement that is still within our planning documents, about connecting a road through the site. Environmental preservation, staff pointed out, there's environmental constraints on this site. Land use decisions, going back to the hospital and discussions on where a future hospital site was going. This was one of the locations that was being discussed. And again, policy directed that's not the appropriate location. So we do have a history of this site in holding to that community vision, what the comprehensive plan desires, and I don't necessarily think that that's a reflection of the property's market value. I do know that in conversations with BEDC and when we talked about the rezoning of the UDO update and rezoning and what was once the old employment district, I can't remember the name, it had a vision of the old employment business park, which we retired that zone and those standards and created 2 new zoning districts. And since then, we even pulled back that to include this to the mixed-use employment rather than the employment zone, again, to respond to some of the market conditions for this site and others that were within that same zone, again, and being responsive to BEDC and trying to retain land that's marketable for growth of an employment. I don't fault the county for, identifying this property. Again, it's been a prime location for a number of different uses over the year. I think it's just a challenging site to meet those expectations of the community.
I'd like to ask a similar question maybe for the petitioner. When we look at this particular property, and as we're drawing the maps, the proximity to the highway is a major consideration there, right? And that's a major factor for a potential large-scale employer, particularly a manufacturer, right? Being close to the highway is a major advantage if you have to move goods in and out of a manufacturing facility or distribution facility, and it makes it easier to get commuting employees in and out. And I think that's one of the major reasons that you'll see all of that highway-adjacent property zoned ME. And so my question would be, you've mentioned some characteristics of the property that make it attractive for a jail, like the tree buffer, for example. But is there anything about the location in particular, and maybe specifically the proximity to the highway, that makes it particularly appropriate as a location for a criminal justice facility?
Well, I think there is. The easiest way to answer is that when we initially started this search, we talked to the sheriff about, what he felt was important, and being along the interstate corridor was extremely important to him. I think I know we do a lot, or the county does a lot of transports of people who are going to other counties. I think there's visitations where people are coming in to see people in the facility. So, I think that being in that corridor is extremely important. I think it gets more important if you start talking about some of the other supportive services that probably will require transportation to other communities. You go into a supportive housing, and then you're anticipating that whoever is there, transitional housing, you're anticipating somebody there is going to get employment. And so being along a major access in a corridor for finding employment is important. I guess I would just think that, there's a reason this property's been vacant for 38 years. I don't know what it is. I'm not a real estate expert. But I do think that was one of the factors when we looked at it. It wasn't number one factor. I think number one factor was trying to maintain neighborhoods and not putting this facility and dissecting a neighborhood. I think that was probably the number one factor. And the number two factor was trying to figure out a place with good transportation access. And we think with Fulton Pike being complete, that would make this property a lot different. And I think everybody would see this property a lot different once that corridor is done. And again, that's going to bid letting next year.
Thank you. Any more questions? One more, Commissioner Smith. Go ahead. Go ahead. I think he had his hand up first, or at least I saw it first.
I have two questions, kind of one that are related. President Whistler. So, is the objection for my planning and transportation friends out there? Is the objection that it doesn't meet the comp plan? Is that real? Is that the thing in for planning and transportation that is the most important thing in the negative recommendation? Mr. Robinson or
Councilmember Smith, thanks for your question. Yes. I mean, we put these plans and documents together to provide that guidance. We certainly are open to revising them and amending them, but I think if we take this step to any request that becomes forward and we don't give any consideration to those documents, what's the purpose of doing them in the first place? The UDO, Ms. Scanlon outlined the legal requirements, that's the findings that staff must make, and that's a recommendation we hope this commission, this body follows. Now, that doesn't mean that the Common Council has to follow those same recommendations, but I do believe that that's what planning is about. We try to plan for, anticipate for these changes. We worked, with many of you and other elected officials in adopting and approving the comprehensive plan. Did we miss something? Maybe we did. That's why we might go back and amend the comprehensive plan to address that. But I think, again, this feels not in this instance, but we have other petitions where it's, hey, we don't agree with the comprehensive plan. You need to give us consideration. That's why we need to be consistent in those recommendations, is we can't take in consideration other factors of what others would like us to do in that instance.
Sure, and I really appreciate your expert advice and expertise on this. I do. So now I have the next question I have is, if it was jail detention was a conditional use for mixed employment, would that allay all your objections?
Well, if you're talking about changing the UDO to add this as a
Conditional use.
conditional use, it's a different process. That's something that the county
Right.
didn't choose to elect.
Right.
So
But as far as your interpretation of that, going along with the guidelines, would that just kind of
it would be
allay
consistent
that?
with, and again, I think Ms. Scanlon's talking to me, and I'm going to let her answer that question, but go ahead.
No, it's, well, like you said, it's a different process, right? So our concerns, the main concern for this petition is that they're requesting a map amendment and it's not in line with the comprehensive plan. But we listed other concerns, including transportation access. And so those things would still be the same, and those things would be discussed we would still be discussing all of the other things that were in the packet if this was a text amendment and not a map amendment in order to add that as conditional. We would be having those same discussions. But the environmental, the access, those types of things.
And again, I think just to follow up and to complete the answer is, let's say that was the case, and it's a conditional use, then this would be before the Board of Zoning Appeals. And we'd be having the same conversations on how is it going to impact with those requirements, the use-specific requirements, one of them, which I believe is transportation access. So it doesn't really solve the problem of this site and what we're trying to address. Community deed is different, but again, the UDO standards in that scenario doesn't necessarily fix the problem, in my opinion.
Thank you, I appreciate it. And before President Whistler throws me off the council, thank you for letting me ask those two questions.
Sure, great questions. And I would add to that, if we were to take that approach, there would be an additional question that we would have to address, which is jail an appropriate use in every other parcel in the city that's zoned ME, right? Which is a whole set of questions that aren't before us right now with this, with the map amendment, right? Commissioner Burrell, you have an additional question?
Yes, question for the petitioner. So have you done environmental studies and what were the findings for this specific site?
We've done a phase 1 and phase 2 environmental study. We've done a jurisdictional and territorial water study. Today we got a final version of our hydrogeology is the company name. They did a study basically for karst features. We have done a geotechnical study, which I don't think I forwarded to planning staff, but we've done all those studies. I guess the biggest, I guess all those studies kind of reflected what we thought at the beginning, with maybe one or two exceptions. We knew from the conservancy easements that there were karst features in the wooded area, and there are karst features in the wooded area. We also knew from that there was a karst feature along I-69. When we initially viewed the site, we could see that there was a wetland-type area along that corridor as well. Turns out that there's also sinkholes in that area, which, I guess we didn't maybe know, but we kind of had suspicion that it would be. I guess the only difference, I think, is that a couple of the karst areas along the I-69 corridor are a little bit larger than we would have thought, than we thought when we looked at it. I don't think that materially impacts the property. I would say that without doing any kind of road design or anything like that, I think there would be enough room that if that roadway to the property to the north was required, there would be the ability to do that. I think I said at the last meeting, and I'd reiterate it, I think building that road across this property is probably not that big a deal. I just don't know how you connect it to TAP without a serious expense. And so I also don't, I question whether it makes sense to have that be a city road where the city has to plow snows on a county driveway. So I would just reiterate that, but I don't think any of that affects it.
So just a follow-up question. So is the county satisfied with all the contingencies regarding for the purchase of the property regarding environmental
I think so.
concerns?
I think, yeah, I'm going to say from one perspective, yes, right? From another perspective, yes, we are, but we realize that we've got to take all these into account when we do our master planning and our site design, which is one of the reasons we didn't want to start that process yet. One reason is because we want to make sure that the city's comfortable with this going on that site. The other one is we needed to make sure we had all these things in place before we started looking at where each widget was going to go on the property.
Thank you.
Any additional questions from commissioners? All right. I think we are ready for public comment. Before we open up public comment, let me just remind everyone that while obviously there's a much broader conversation about criminal justice in the county and whether or not and when a jail should be built, that's not really the purview of this body is much more limited than that. The only question before this body tonight is this particular parcel of land an appropriate place for a jail, and should we rezone it to make that possible? So I just ask that while there are a wide range of very important topics to discuss, that if you would just attempt to keep your comments germane to the issue of this particular parcel tonight. But if you do like to make a comment on that, please, when you're in the chambers, feel free to step up to the podium, state your name for the record. You'll have 5 minutes to make comment. If you're joining us remotely, if you're online, just click on the reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom window, and then click on the raise hand button, and we will attempt to recognize you in the order in which you raised your hand. And again, you'll have 5 minutes to make comment.
Okay, I have a few here online that have already messaged or raised hands. So the first person we have here is Sydney Foreman.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So, hi, my name is Sydney Foreman. I wanted to speak against this rezone proposal today. I think the findings presented by the department bring up legitimate concerns regarding transportation surrounding the site, which is an exorbitant issue with the intended use to be to build a new jail on the land. Relocating the county jail from downtown removes accessibility for many families of inmates, increases barriers to defendants from getting to the jail, where failure to appear is already a huge reason for revocations. So if the jail is located way out there on Fullerton Pike, how is that going to impact those numbers? There is the cost to fund buses or other transportation services. Who would be paying for this transportation? Where would that come from? And moving the jail away from downtown is like pushing the lives of incarcerated people out of sight and out of mind, which just kind of sits uncomfortable with me. I also have concern for the land use being appropriate for the natural environment of the land. There are multiple wetlands on this piece of land, and thinking that building a huge jail facility on the land will impact the health of these wetlands is, in my opinion, just blatant disregard for Bloomington's environmental health. The Environmental Protection Agency reports that in years up to 1980, Indiana had already lost 90% of its natural wetlands acreage. So moving these 3 wetlands around may not seem like a big deal in the vacuum of one community, but we have to look at the whole picture. We need these protected areas to be wetlands, or wetlands to be protected areas. And I think this request also disregards the comprehensive plan of placing new employment opportunities on this land and not just relocating employment that already exists within the city limits. So again, I please just ask you to not support this rezone request today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the next name we had was Danielle Bird.
Hello, my name is Danielle Bird. I am a Monroe County resident and also a social worker of over 25 years. And I am associated with New Leaf, New Life, which provides services to people who are formerly and currently incarcerated. However, my comments don't reflect the views of all folks, I'm sure. I'm not representing the organization, I want to say. So thank you so much to the planning staff and Plan Commission for their consideration. And I do want to say that I would like this rezone to be denied. I agree with staff and I echo many of their concerns. I don't believe that a jail is consistent with our comprehensive plan. I don't believe this is a wonderful gateway to our community. I think that arguing that this is meeting the qualifications for employment is disingenuous. I don't think employing correctional officers is any new employment opportunity. Folks have that opportunity at our current jail, and our current jail is extremely understaffed. So this is not a new employment opportunity at all. And also, if we want to consider the individuals who are incarcerated, jail greatly impedes and disrupts their employment opportunities, not only during incarceration, but for their future. So there is a lot of talk, and I appreciate all the efforts going into keeping people out of jail. So I think those are more important for our community to invest in than cages. We do, if those of you would please read the consultant reports, our county hired consultants. We arrest above the national average for mentally ill and folks with substance use disorder. So we have a long way to go. But I'm going to keep it to some of the land use issues. Also, I want to talk about the location. This is incredibly problematic, even if there's even a shuttle from transit provided, because folks are released from incarceration. Often they're wearing exactly what they were wearing when they were arrested. We've had people come to New Leaf, New Life in flip-flops and shorts in the winter time. I can't imagine somebody sitting and waiting on a bus, even if that were available, to get to services. This location is extremely far from all the supportive services that people need. This includes Beacon, the Community Kitchen, New Leaf, New Life, and Centerstone. So families can't get on site to attend court hearings. They're talking about co-locating maybe one or two courts. So, family members can't be there to attend. So service providers who actually do provide services in the jail, this is very far for them to travel to get out there and provide these services in the jail. Also, my next point is the county has not done due diligence to evaluate the cost and feasibility to renovate the current jail. It is not overcrowded anymore. I keep hearing a lot of statements that are being made that are not accurate. If you look at average numbers, we are not we're not overcrowded. Our jail numbers have gone down. So please be sure to think about the fact that we already have a jail. It's located and co-located with the prosecutor's office, the public defender's office, all of those services. And yes, there are problems with that facility, but it's 30-some years old, it's not even 40 years old. And so I believe that we need to do our due diligence to look at what are the costs to renovate that facility. Our consultants recommended that as well, to look into that. So, and services provided in cages is not evidence-based and it's not progressive. We need to support community services that we already have. And there's nobody that's going to travel to jail to want to get services. So thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Molly.
Hi, Plan Commission. My name's Molly Turner King. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, my name's Molly Turner King, and I'm currently a county employee, but I'm not speaking today in my capacity of my current position, but I just wanted to offer some insight from my experience as both a prosecutor and a public defender in light of this transportation concern. I I will say, as a public defender and a prosecutor, a few years ago, there was a local rule made where defendants do not have to come to every court hearing. For pretrial conferences, as long as the defendant remains in contact with their attorney, they do not have to physically appear in a courtroom. And the prosecutors and the public defender's office, along with the court, are really good at working with defendants on accommodating when they can and cannot appear for hearings. And I thought, sorry, there's a baby in the background. I thought that might lend some insight into why this facility could still accommodate transportation needs of the people who need to use the facility.
Thank you. Are there additional online
We
commenters?
have one submitted via writing for someone who isn't able to speak, and I confirm that I can go ahead and read that. This is from Sam Dove. He says, homeless need transportation on Sunday. Places take a long time to walk, and I think people need buses on Sunday. I don't know why there are no city buses on Sunday. It needs to be one. That's all I had. Thanks.
All right. Is there anyone else who would like to make public comment? Again, if you're joining us remotely, just click on that reactions button and then click on raise hand, and we will recognize you. If you're here in the chambers and want to make comment, just step right up to the podium.
Nothing else on Zoom.
All right, last call for public comment. Okay, we are back to the commission then, and we are now ready for any final comments or for a motion. But before we jump into that, I just want to take a moment to just clarify what our options are here. The staff has recommended that we forward this to the council with a negative recommendation. But I just want to ask Mr. Rooker if you would just sort of confirm, no matter what happens tonight, we need to forward this on. This needs to go on to the council, either with a positive recommendation, a negative recommendation, or no recommendation. But what would happen if we fail to pass one of those three motions tonight?
So if you fail to pass one of those three motions, you could further continue the petition. That would be possible, but I think we've heard from the petitioner that they would like us to move forward tonight with a recommendation. Either a positive recommendation, a negative recommendation, or no recommendation at all. Functionally, there is no difference in terms of the legal effect of no recommendation or a negative recommendation. Effectively, the difference between a negative recommendation or no recommendation and a positive recommendation is that if the city council were unable to muster 5 votes within the 90-day subsequent period, they have to act after certification, then the planning commission's decision would stand. So it would either be denied if it's no recommendation, or a negative recommendation, or if the planning commission can give it a positive recommendation and the city council takes no action, then the rezoning must be.
So our recommendation is only relevant in the event that the council fails to approve once we forward it on to them.
I would say legally relevant.
Legally, yes. Sure. Yes. Yes, of course. Thank you. Okay. So,
So in that case, tonight's vote will remain, or are we going to have, if that happens, as a probability after the 90 days, if that happens, there will be one more meeting regarding this, or is tonight's votes if the council doesn't decide the final outcome?
There will be no further consideration of this rezone request by the planning commission. It's not like a text amendment. The city council can't meddle with the request. They can either approve the rezone request or deny the rezone request.
so if you want there to be any more discussion at this body of this issue, we would have to affirm a continuance is the only way that we would have an additional conversation at this body, is if we voted to continue it to our next meeting. So any motion to forward to the council, regardless of the recommendation, will be the last action that we take on this petition. Yeah. Okay, we're all clear on that. Does anyone like to make a final comment or to offer a motion? Well, while you're contemplating that, I will just remind you all of the staff recommendation. The staff recommendation is that we forward the petition to the council with a negative recommendation. I believe we'd also need to adopt the proposed findings and forward with a negative recommendation. Commissioner Enright Randolph.
I was searching our network, my C drive on my laptop, for the comprehensive plan that was passed in 2018. I would have swore it was going to be a digital format, but no, that's when I was still printing out the document. My last comment is comprehensive plans are a guiding document that are fluent. I think when I did a search, I searched the document for jail, it didn't show up once. So I think that's significant. We don't have a guiding document for this issue that we find ourselves in today. But also, what's in this comprehensive plan is local government partnership. It talks about working interlocally with the county, the town, the university. What I'm seeing here is a lack of solutions and a compound problem. We need to address this. If we move it with any recommendation here, it'll move to the Common Council, and they'll have to address it there as well. But I think our comprehensive plan needs to be looked at so we don't find ourselves in this situation again.
Thank you. Commissioner Kinsey.
Thank you. I'm going to start with a comment and then perhaps move to a proposal here. It seems pretty clear to me that based on the Plan Commission purview, that including our considerations for compliance with the comprehensive plan and making sure the land is being used for its most desirable use and what an MI should be regarding transportation and concerns about that we should not support this proposed map amendment. That seems pretty straightforward to me. What we haven't focused on tonight is the loss of ME in a newly viable and improved interchange. The concern that was just mentioned by one of the commenters, one of the public commenters, that we should not be happy about moving employment around in the community, that's not satisfying the goals of ME. All of those things to me, and the most important one is not rezoning for a very specific use or a single use in this case. That all of those things seem like, as a commission responsible for land use, that we should not support this map amendment and that we should forward it with a negative recommendation. The issues that are giving me some pause are, I really appreciate Commissioner Enright's comment about the importance of coordinated responses to complex community challenges like this. That gives me pause, and I really appreciate his comment. And the concerns about the lack of MI in the city gives me pause. And this concern about constitutional level of care for citizens who are in the jail makes me concerned, but that's not really within our purview. And So ultimately, I have to come down to saying that I feel the Plan Commission should not approve this map amendment, and that we should accept the recommendations and the findings of the staff and forward this with a negative recommendation. So that's where I am on this proposal. I'd like to hear from a few other folks if there are comments from our colleagues on the Plan Commission before I really make a proposal here for consideration, but that's where I am right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comments? Commissioner Cochran, go ahead.
I look at this site and I think of the highest and best use, and I'm in this world with the commercial real estate. So I look at this, and that's one of the reasons why I asked the question, is there something in code or something that's preventing it? Because the market in general, now it has slowed down with the interest rates a little bit, but the market in general has, the need for having, industrial type space or employment space, the demand's high right now across the country. I look at this site and I like the characteristics of it. I looked at the sites that were on the chart, and I saw that they were surrounded by highways and very similar to this site, and the fact that it has the borders, and I like that part of it too. I'm concerned of obviously removing this employment opportunity, but then I think to myself, are there other opportunities within Bloomington that might have a higher and better use? It's one of the reasons why I asked the question there by Catalent. And that has a real potential use there that's going to bring some great jobs. And maybe it might not happen. I understand that. But the potential there, it just seems like something that's more achievable to put jobs in our community than this site right now. I do not like that it doesn't align with the comprehensive plan. But it was 2018. A lot has changed since then. And again, it's a guiding document. So is it well, obviously we look at that, but I guess my biggest thing is when there's limited ME zoning in the city and then removing it, that's a big deal. But again, I'm really torn because I would like to move this forward with a positive recommendation because I know the needs, and then working with the county on this to solve a huge issue in our community. And again, so I'm a little bit torn. I could see standing Commissioner Kinzer. I completely understand your reasoning, and I support that as well. So I'm not sure what direction I'm going to go right now, but when I came in here, I thought, that I would move this forward with a positive recommendation. So I'm not going to make a motion right now, but I'd like to hear again from other commissioners. Thank you.
Any other comments? Well, I would just say I think I agree with largely what Commissioner Kinsey has said. This is obviously a very complex issue, and it's really, really difficult as a plan commissioner to, not let all the other aspects of this issue creep into our decision-making tonight, right? Because obviously it's an important issue and one that is emotional and heavy, and clearly something needs to be done, and there's a lot of hard work that's being done on it, and so it's hard to see all that and then say no. But I think the reality is if we really do concentrate on what our authority here is, I think the evidence says it doesn't comply with our with our comprehensive plan. And if all I'm thinking about is land use, I can't see how it makes sense to give up one of the few parcels in town that is suitable for large-scale employment. If we're ever going to attract another large-scale employer, I think where's it going to go? I mean, this is one of very, very few places. Now, thankfully, almost no matter what we do tonight, this is going to move on to the City Council. And the City Council has a purview that is much, much broader than ours. They can consider a lot of other aspects of this. And one of the reasons we have a City Council member here on this commission is so that they can report back to the council on all of the discussion that was had tonight. And I'm confident that regardless of whether we forward this with a positive recommendation or no recommendation or negative recommendation, that our colleague will be asked and will report that this wasn't an easy decision either way. And I think, it's appropriate that the City Council have that conversation, which can be, I think, much, like I said, much broader than what is our authority to consider tonight. So I'm eager to hear a motion and get this moving, regardless of what the recommendation is. I think the City Council has a tough job ahead of them, and I don't envy you, but I'm eager to see this move along through the process. Commissioner St. John.
I don't have a motion, but I have a comment, or I don't know if I have a motion. I do just want to thank you, because clearly you've done a great job outlining the need. I think it's quite clear to everyone here that we do have a big problem in our community with how we take care of people who are facing incarceration and the services around that. So thank you for even shedding more light on that. It's a really important discussion. But it's complicated because we're just the Plan Commission, so it's a big question to put in front of us. It's not kind of the normal sort of heavy, weighty thing we do. Not that what we do up here isn't important, it's just that's a whole different question. And similarly, it's complicated because we rely on the professionals of the planning department. I have a lot of respect of them, or respect for them, as I do know my colleagues do as well. And when they make a comment that they don't have enough information, that's not something we normally hear. That's an odd thing, in my opinion, for us to hear from them. And it sort of feels like we don't have enough information. And maybe the petitioner has it, but somehow the communication hasn't happened at a level that maybe we're normally used to. And I'm not sure why that is, but it feels and seems that way from here. And not saying anyone isn't communicating, but somehow something's not happening there so that we can make a full decision. So given that, those two things make this really complicated. The fact that there are some heavy things here, the transportation, the comprehensive plan, it doesn't agree with that. I understand it's a guideline, I get it, but it's also a guideline. It's not the absence of anything. It is something in front of us that at some point, 2018 does seem like a long time ago, but it's not 1900 either. It was just 4 years ago. So I get a lot has changed, but that is a guideline we have in front of us, and I choose not to wholly ignore it because it's not a law. So, and the space need, I love all the ideas of what you can do with wraparound services, although I'm really struggle to see how locating them there without transportation is helpful. Community mental health center sounds wonderful, but that's completely new information again. And so it's yes, it's a super complicated moment and tough to decide what to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Smith.
Sure. Honestly, it's doubly hard for me. I'm looking at things from two perspectives. I'm on the Plan Commission, and I'm on City Council that can consider it in a broader way. So it's really, I'm just having a hard time with even considering how to think about it. Except I do think about it broadly, and I do think that I'm really good with thinking about things in guidelines, unless it explicitly says it's a law. So me, I would vote to support this change to MI. And I guess that's probably where I'm at. I know we get paid the big bucks to make these hard decisions, and I think, that's kind of where I would go. So thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments?
I'll just briefly, I know this is a prolonged discussion that we're having. I'm kind of going off what Commissioner Cochran said. To me, walking into this meeting, I thought this could be about a 2-minute decision. But I also told my wife when I was leaving the house, we're going to probably talk about things for a couple hours because it's complex. There's a lot of factors. I definitely want to recognize the work the county's done. It sounds like a very, very much needed endeavor. And so appreciating what you guys have come up with so far. But I think there's still a ways to go. 2 things with that. One is the employment aspect. I'm with Commissioner Cochran. That's a big question mark. If we could put something in there that's going to employ X amount of people, even though nobody's done it yet, he's exactly right. The shifting of the economies are proving that something could be done there. So I think that's a big risk we could take with the employment. And I also want to go off Commissioner St. John's comment about what the planning department comes up with, and that's asking for more information. I'm new to this commission. I've only been on here a year, but they're very, very astute in what they do and how they dissect things. And so for them to come to us and say, we need more, I listen to that and I hear that. And that ultimately, I think those 2 factors are going to sway me to agree with what they're telling us. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or a motion? Commissioner Kinsey.
Well, I'm ready to put a motion forward unless there are any other council comments.
Please do.
Well, I would like to motion to accept the staff recommendation and findings and forward ZO 40-22 with a negative recommendation to the City Council.
Okay, the motion is to forward to the council with a negative recommendation. Is there a second for that motion?
I was like that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any final discussion before we call the roll on this motion? All right. Darla, would you please call the roll?
Can I just clarify? So a yes is a negative recommendation?
Well, yes, a yes vote is a vote to forward with a negative recommendation. A no vote would be a vote against forwarding with a negative recommendation. If this motion fails, we could still consider another motion to forward with a different recommendation. So, all right, yes, please call the roll.
Ballard.
Yes.
Burrell.
No.
Seaboard.
Yes.
Cockrum.
No.
Pereira.
Yes.
Kinsey.
Yes.
Smith.
No.
St. John.
Yes.
Whistler.
Yes. So I believe that motion carries 6-3. Okay, so thank you. We are done with our consideration of ZO 40-22. Thank you all for your patience. I know that was quite a lengthy discussion. If there's no objection, I'm going to move that we take a quick 5-minute recess before we move on to the next petition. But before we do that, I know we have a couple of commissioners who are want to make a statement before we get on to ZO 45-22. So Commissioner St. John, would you like to make a statement?
I will step off the commission for this petition because of a conflict of interest, but I will be in the audience.
Great. And Commissioner Cockrum?
I will step off as well as a conflict as well, so.
Okay, so when we come back, we will consider ZO 4522. Just as a reminder, we will have only 7 of 9 commissioners participating in that discussion. We'll still need 5 out of 7 instead of 5 out of 9 to take any official action on that petition. So it is 7:53 by my count, so we will reconvene here at 7:58. Thank you. Okay, we will reconvene here in just a few seconds. Okay, thank you all. We will reconvene now. We will continue our agenda with petition ZO 45-22. This is St. Real Estate LLC is the petitioner here, and we have Karina Pazos to present. Take it away, Karina.
Recording in progress.
Okay, thank you. So this one is for 3 parcels located at 300, 302, 314 West 1st Street. And the site is zoned mixed use neighborhood scale. Its surrounding uses include office, medical clinic, personal service, and retail sales. The 2 eastern parcels are currently developed with 1 office building that contains St. John Associates, and the 3rd parcel to the west is currently vacant. The properties to the north and west are part of the Hopewell redevelopment project, and the alley to the west was recently vacated, so the new western property line is now to the center of the alley. And the petitioner is requesting a zoning map amendment of the 3 parcels from mixed-use neighborhood scale to mixed-use medium scale, and a request for a waiver from the second hearing. So the Unified Development Ordinance identifies the petitioner's land use as office, which is a permitted use in the current MN district. The difference between MN and MM is that the proposed zoning district, MM, does not allow for dwelling cottage development uses, whereas the current zoning does allow it as a conditional use. But the proposed zoning district also does allow for 12 non-residential uses that would require conditional use approval under the current zoning, and 26 non-residential permitted or conditional uses that would not be allowed at all under the current zoning. As part of the zoning map amendment, the petitioner is required to dedicate right-of-way as indicated by the transportation plan. In this case, a 6-foot right-of-way dedication is required along South Morton Street. And there are a couple differences between the dimensional standards of both zoning districts. So MN has a maximum area of any individual commercial tenant, whereas the proposed MM does not, and it allows for 4 stories of maximum height. And then here are a couple of the sections from the allowed use table in the UDO that show a comparison of which uses go from conditional or permitted to, go from conditional or not permitted at all to being permitted or conditional under the proposed MM district. The comprehensive plan designates the site as mixed urban residential. The mixed urban residential district is identified as having complete access to utilities, fire, police, streets, sidewalks, and other facilities that provide mobility at a 20-minute neighborhood level of service. A main objective of this area is making necessary upgrades and capital investments. This district generally has a mix of uses and a mix of densities ranging from single-family residences to larger 2 to 4 story apartment buildings. This petition helps further the goals of the comprehensive plan by expanding the variety of residential and non-residential uses that can be allowed, as well as dedicating right-of-way along Morton Street to ensure public improvements will be made if future redevelopment of the site is desired. Specifically, these are the 3 goals from the comprehensive plan that this petition can help support by having more uses to choose from with the potential redevelopment of the site. So the proposed finding for the general compliance criteria is that the proposed rezoning is in compliance and will meet all applicable standards in the UDO if right-of-way dedication consistent with the transportation plan is submitted within 180 days of approval by Common Council. And the proposed finding for additional criteria that is applicable to a zoning map amendment is that the proposal is consistent with the comprehensive plan and intergovernmental agreements. The proposed right-of-way dedication along Morton Street will be consistent with the Hopewell development right-of-way dedication. The proposed rezoning is not expected to have any adverse impacts. The city will be making street and sidewalk facility upgrades along West First Street. The proposal provides adequate public services and facilities with the proposed right-of-way dedication, and there is no redevelopment or phasing plan proposed at this time. The proposed finding for specific approval criteria is that the comprehensive plan designates the site as mixed urban residential and identifies this area as appropriate for lower high-density uses, noting that these areas are well served by existing infrastructure. A diversity of land uses in this district is also encouraged. The site has currently been developed with a building owned by the petitioner that provides an office use. The dedication of right-of-way along Morton Street, as well as near future improvements to First Street, further increases or upgrades the multimodal transportation options for users at this location. Approval of this request would allow for expanded use offerings for members of the community. The comprehensive plan, this is continued for the last proposed finding. So the comprehensive plan states that a wide range of land uses is appropriate within this district. The rezoning of the site to MM would also match adjacent land to the north that is zoned the same. There are no known sensitive environmental features on the site. The proposed rezoning is not expected to have any negative impacts on adjacent property values. The rezoning of the site will help further many goals of the comprehensive plan and facilitate additional resources available to the community. And the comprehensive plan states that this district is appropriate for a variety of uses, and the high level of access to the site makes it even more ideal for different possible redevelopment options. So the department believes that the rezoning of the site to MM would match the comprehensive plan designation of the site as mixed urban residential. The site's current use is permitted in both the current MN and the desired MM zoning districts, and a rezone would expand on the possible uses that could go in here and match the uses of the majority of properties in this area. The rezoning of these properties to MM would not affect adjacent businesses, would bring the property in line with the zoning of the surrounding properties, and would allow this use to expand and better serve the needs of the overall community in an area that is appropriate and in line with the comprehensive plan. The department recommends the Plan Commission approve the waiver to not require a second hearing and forward this petition to Common Council with a favorable recommendation with the following condition. Right-of-way dedication consistent with the transportation plan is required within 180 days of approval by Common Council. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there a representative of the petitioner who would like to make a statement tonight? You look
Hello.
familiar, but please state your name for the record.
Yes, hello. Chris Cockrum with FC Tucker Commercial, and I'm the representative for St. John Real Estate. And first off, I'd just like to thank the planning staff for the work they've done on this. So this request is all about the timing of the opportunities that's in that area. And the redevelopment of the hospital land and the Hopewell site is I mean, it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to really do something great in Bloomington. And this site connects right along Morton Street right there. And all of the land right around there is zone MM. So when you look at it, it just makes sense for this one to be zoned the same. So by changing it, we feel that it's just going to help the overall development of the Hopewell site and also attract a developer to come in there and take away the hurdles if they wanted to come in and purchase this site to have to take it through the zoning process or to do any changes, because anytime you create that timing, it just slows the process down. So it's going to be more attractive to a developer to come in there and do something really special along there. And as stated by the planning staff, MM matches the comprehensive plan. It matches the majority of the properties that are in the area. Planning staff mentioned that it won't negatively affect any of the adjacent businesses, which as a commercial real estate broker, I would completely agree. It brings the property in line with the zoning of the other properties in the area. And it also will add more uses for it, which the comprehensive plan also mentions that this area should be able to attract several different business uses to serve Bloomington. Planning staff also said it would not negatively impact the adjacent property owners, which as in my profession, I would also agree. And again, it reaches the goals of the comprehensive plan, and it gives the opportunity for additional resources in the area. And as stated, it would add value to the Hopewell site. It would add value to help develop that site, to have this property zoned similar to the other parcels in that area. So in closing, the petitioner has operated a local business in Bloomington for over 30 years, has 20 employees. They were very community-minded. They really they're plugged in with the area. They want to do what's best for the area and be a team player to kind of help make that area a lot better. And again, with the goals of rezoning this property, it would be a viable option in the redevelopment process. And again, it's all about the timing of it. So the reason we're making this request is because of the opportunities in the area and the timing to make something happen in this area. I will mention the property is for sale. We are looking to sell it. We did offer it to the city immediately. At the time, the city wasn't able to move on the property, so we do have it on the market. And so we think it would make the property even more marketable, but also it's going to, hopefully a developer will be attracted to it to again, develop the whole area. Would be happy to answer any questions, and I just ask that you move this forward with with a positive recommendation.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Are there any questions from commissioners, either for staff or for the petitioner tonight? Commissioner Seabour.
Just a question, just kind of following up on our previous item, but one of the condition that is included with the recommendation is the dedication of right-of-way. And I guess just to hear from the applicant if that causes any concerns, I don't know how significant of it is, but just does the condition to match the transportation plan create any, is that agreeable? I assume it is, but just wanted to confirm.
Yeah, we did not think that that was an issue. I mean, it's a part of it, and we support that code. So it's not something that we felt that would negatively impact the property.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Any other questions? Commissioner Smith.
I don't know what this means. So if anyone can say what perhaps planning, when it talks about reduces setbacks to 0 feet, explain it to me in lay terms so I understand. That's table 2.29, and yeah, I don't exactly know what that means in a practical sense.
I think it's for the next petition.
I'm sorry?
I think it's for the next petition, actually. Is it, because I don't remember seeing.
So sorry, I jumped the gun. Thank
No
you.
problem.
Commissioner Kinsey.
Thank you. I actually have a question on the other side of what Commissioner Seabour just asked. The question was posed to the petitioner, and I wonder if the staff can speak about the value of this right-of-way allowance and what it means for the community.
I think Jackie might have a better answer, but yeah, I think it would allow for, I can't remember if in the transportation plan, Morton Street calls for a bike lane, maybe not.
Sure, sorry, Jackie Scanlon, Development Services Manager. In this case, and in most cases, like what Karina says, it allows for our future roadway land use plans, our future right-of-way land use plans for right-of-way, for plans for vehicles and pedestrians to be met more easily because it creates that opportunity of real right-of-way for those facilities to be installed. In this particular case, it will allow for alignment with the right-of-way dedication that's happening at the larger Phase 1 East site. So dedication that obviously this property was not involved in that subdivision that you all have seen. So this will align the right-of-way with the right-of-ways that came through on the surrounding properties. So that will allow for, again, pedestrian facilities to be able to be lined up in the future in a more consistent way on both sides of this property.
Great. So I'm going to summarize that to make sure I've got it right. This is a benefit then as we continue to develop all of the other parcels nearby, because it could allow us to well, it will allow the alignment of these, of ped-friendly and bike-friendly passageways. So it's not fragmented. So it allows a more comprehensive right-of-ways and transportation planning in this case. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it allows consistency of design in the future. So when this property goes to redevelop, then we will look at what is there. You know, we are doing a city-led First Street project currently that is in the works, but also on the north-south on Madison, we would look to see are there improvements that need to be made when this property goes to redevelop to improve those public areas. And in this way, we'll have the right-of-way as opposed to on a city project where we have to purchase right-of-way, and sometimes, especially, and it happened in this case, there are constraints on the site that make that difficult. And so this way, it'll just be available when this property redevelops.
Okay, so that is a benefit. Good. And so I have a related question then too about the bike and ped access. And the plan packet said that the city was making upgrades on First Street And I wonder if Karina or you can say a little bit more about those improvements and again, what this rezone would allow.
Yeah, so I know that discussing with the engineering department, there are supposed to be upgrades to the sidewalk along West First Street, as well as the street is being completely repaved. And then, so the sidewalk is going to be brought up to ADA compliance, was my understanding. So those were the improvements along West First Street. And I don't know if was there another question that I missed?
Well, I always think about some of our public commenters who always want to increase bike and pedestrian access and continuity. And if this contributes to that, then I would like to have confirmation of it.
Yeah, I think we would, I'm so sorry, ask Commissioner Seabour if he could confirm that. I'm not sure what the bike facility is here, again, because there was some constrained right-of-way. I'm not sure what exactly is going on first.
A little bit to the city's First Street project. So we will be reconstructing First Street essentially from College to a point west of Fairview in the coming years. That's getting close to be going out to bid later, early in 2023. A big part of that project is sidewalk infrastructure. So sidewalk where it doesn't currently exist along this corridor will be installed. In many places where it exists today, it will be replaced, and where we physically can fit in a separation from the road and the sidewalk by providing landscape tree lawns and such, that will be part of the project as well. And a lot of utility underground infrastructure is going to be replaced. So it's going to be a full reconstruction of the road, a major change at the Fairview intersection that currently has a significant hill and limits visibility, and so there's going to be a lot of improvements there. But this project and the right-of-way dedication associated with the rezone, I think, works in line with that, and most of the dedication of right-of-way, I believe, is along the Morton Street frontage, so that more enables a future project, either through redevelopment or a future city project to there's sidewalk there, but either to reconstruct it or to put that tree lawn and other facilities in will give that space to do so.
Thank you for that clarification. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from commissioners? I've got one just quick question for staff, and that is, when you look at the map, you see this parcel kind of surrounded by MM. Do you recall when we drew the maps, is there any particular reason why this was MN originally and not MM?
Sure. So my recollection when we did the map was you can see that also the parcels to the west that are operated by Centerstone also remain MN, and then I think to the south. So when we were looking at this map and looking forward to Phase 1 East, I think there was just some discussion about existing uses at the site and if those could be maintained with a lower with the lower mixed-use classification of MN. Mr. Roebling might remember, I don't remember if that was a continuity issue, if they were already lower and we just didn't increase them, but we do think increasing is
Just didn't
appropriate
want
and
to
fine.
assume an upzone.
We tried to not change very many people's districts unless there was a compelling reason, basically.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, any public comment? If you're here in the chambers and you would like to make comment, just step up to the podium. If you're online and would like to comment, just click on the reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom window, and then click on raise hand, and we will recognize you when it is your turn to speak. You will have 5 minutes to make comment.
I don't see anyone. I'm sorry, I forgot that the districts in this area were drawn to match the master plan, which did take some of those considerations that I mentioned into effect when they suggested the districts for the area.
I see.
Sorry.
Thank you.
And no one on Zoom thus far.
All right, any public comment on ZO 45-22? Again, if you're online, just click reactions, then click raise hand, and we will recognize you. Last call for public comment. All right, we are back to the commission then for any final discussion or a motion. As a reminder, the staff recommendation is that we approve the waiver for a second hearing and forward this petition to the council with a favorable recommendation and the one condition that the right-of-way dedication consistent with the transportation plan is required within 180 days of approval by the Common Council. Commissioner Burrell.
I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to approve the waiver to not require a second hearing and forward this petition to the Common Council with a favorable recommendation and with the following condition. The right-of-way dedication consistent with the transportation plan is required within 80 days of approval by Common Council.
All right, we have a motion that matches the staff recommendation in the packet. Do we have a second for that motion?
Second.
All right, motion and a second. Do we have any final discussion before we call the roll? All right, Darla, would you please call the roll?
Whistler.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
Kinsey.
Yes.
Pereira.
Yes.
Seaboard.
Yes.
Burrell.
Yes.
And Ballard.
Yes.
All right, that motion carries 7-0. All right, we will move on now to petition Z051-22. And this is a text amendment to the UDO. And we are going to have Jackie Scanlon again to present. Whenever you're ready, Jackie.
Be just a second. Mr. Roebling's actually going to present it to you. Just a sec.
Ah, okay.
Okay, sorry about that. Ryan Roebling, Planning Services Manager, presenting Z05122. This zoning text amendment was brought to you by a resolution 2217 by the City of Bloomington Common Council. It asked Plan Commission to propose an amendment to the Unified Development Ordinance to establish an overlay district related to the development of the Hopewell neighborhood. So first things first, what is an overlay? An overlay is a district that is a zoning district placed on top of or an existing zoning district, or over part of a district, or multiple districts. The boundaries of the overlay are often selected in order to protect environmental features, preserve historic buildings, or promote economic and residential development within an area. The regulations and boundaries of the overlay zoning district are allowed focused regulation to be tailored to areas within the city which share unique characteristics. The regulations within the overlay may be more or less restrictive than the underlying base zoning districts, and those overlay district standards will always supersede the regulation of the base zoning district for all specific regulations identified within the overlay district ordinance. So the city actually has an overlay right now. It's the downtown character overlay. I'm sure you're all familiar. Within that, there are 6 character districts. You can see Courthouse Square, Downtown Core, et cetera. The DCO, as it's abbreviated, has regulations regarding building setbacks, impervious surface coverages, architecture, and allowed uses. So much like the existing DCO, the TRO, Transform Redevelopment Overlay, as it's named, has these guidelines from Resolution 1722. There are 8 in total, and I'll go through them one by one here. The first is subdivision standards should require alleys in this area. That is being done by the subdivision development standards. Seen here, the proposed overlay will require that all subdivisions go through what's called the infill subdivision development standard. So that it's modified within the overlay to say that 100% of all lots are served by alleys that meet the transportation plan requirements. Second is that all drive access is required from alleys rather than streets. So that's being done through this alley access requirement. A driveway accessing the street shall be prohibited from side or rear, when side or rear alleys are adjacent to the property, a platted alley, excuse me. So the combination of changes will ensure that newly created lots and any lots adjacent to an existing alley will be required to have drive access from that alley. This will severely reduce the number and hopefully eliminate the number of drive cuts within the overlay. The resolution identified 4 specific dimensional standards that are proposed to be modified. The first include adjustments to the impervious surface maximum and minimum landscape area. So within the mixed use and non-residential zoned properties, within the overlay, the allowed increase to the impervious surface maximum will be 25 percentage points above the underlying base zoning district. Within residential zoned properties, that'll be 15 percentage points. So that increase is in addition to the standards of the underlying base zoning district. So for example, property within the mixed-use medium scale MM zoning district would be allowed an 85% maximum impervious surface coverage rather than the base of 60%. The landscape minimum has been modified to match that increase in the impervious surfaces. All right. Okay. So the resolution guidance also called for reduced side and rear setbacks. Side setbacks are proposed to be reduced to 0 feet. And then in rear setbacks for mixed use and non-residential zoning districts will be 0 feet. And then for the residential zoning districts, the rear setback will now be 10 feet. So a reduction in minimum lot size is also called for. That will be done through in the mixed use and non-residential zoning districts, there will be no minimum lot size, and in the residential zoning districts, it will now be 1,500 square feet. And then the minimum lot width in the district will now be 35 feet along rights of way. For single-family, duplex, triplex, and fourplex uses, they will utilize the R4 zoning district. This is similar to the RH, residential high density, and RM, residential medium density. And then there was a call for the reduction of the elimination of parking minimums. We've done that just by writing that down. And then this one is the the pedestrian scale development standards for first floor residential uses. So this is achieved in a number of different ways. The first is that multifamily dwellings along streets identified in the transportation plan as Main Street, Shared Street, or General Urban, as well as those along the Beeline Trail, will be required to be located 20 feet behind the building facade facing those streets. So this standard will prevent dwelling unit. This standard will prevent dwelling units from being located directly adjacent to the most well-traveled streets within the overlay. And that will apply in this district to properties along 2nd and Rogers specifically. Dwelling units which have front building walls that face a street are required to be raised 2 to 5 feet above sidewalk level. This will raise windows and some private entrances above sidewalk level, increasing privacy from the street while allowing for windows along the building facade. Activated front setbacks will be required. Front setbacks will not be allowed to generate dead space and will be required to provide landscaping or, as an alternative, outdoor commercial uses. This will promote walkability. Primary buildings are required to include a courtyard equal to 5% of the building's total footprint. The courtyard will have to be visible from the sidewalk and will provide a visual break from the building facades, as well as activating the space. Ground floor residential facades are required to provide at least 20% glass or framed facades. This will reduce the amount of blank and uninterrupted walls while still offering privacy from dwelling units on the ground floor. And then the maximum building floor plate within the overlay is limited to 5,000 square feet without achieving affordable housing incentives or sustainable incentives. This will reduce the length of building and break up facades more often. All right, so here are the Resolution 1722 guidelines. So we believe we've addressed all of those. We've also authored additional proposed regulations. The first is modifying the allowed use table within the overlay. We're expanding the permitted uses to allow for almost all of the dwelling uses, specifically all the plex uses and the multifamily uses, so that they will be permitted with use-specific standards throughout the district. And then we are decreasing the number of uses that are allowed by excluding a couple of uses that are generally seen as in conflict with higher density residential developments, things like crematories or kennels. And then due to the increase in allowed impervious surface coverage on the properties within the overlay, a standard to require all entrances and drives, as well as surface level parking lots, to be constructed solely of permeable pavers has been included. The list of primary and secondary exterior finish materials has been expanded to give greater flexibility in design. And then, developments within the overlay will be required to have street lighting. New regulation on exterior facades to prevent blank walls will be proposed. These include minimum window percentage along the ground floor, as I mentioned before. A required canopy, awning, or other roof-like cover to protect from the weather. A requirement that each multifamily unit have direct access to a covered balcony, patio, or porch. And modification in the landscaping standards to promote healthy vegetation growth within the area that has allowed greater impervious surface coverage. This actually matches what is allowed in the downtown right now. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the maximum floor plate is 5,000 square feet unless you achieve incentives. The incentives have been modified slightly in the overlay to allow for 10,000 square feet if either the affordable housing or sustainable development incentives are achieved. If both are achieved, the maximum floor plate can then be 20,000 square feet. Then the maximum building height is the same as the base underlying zoning district. So for the MM zoning district, that would be 4 stories. However, if Tier 1 project, affordable housing projects are achieved, 2 additional floors can be achieved. Tier 2, 2 additional floors can be achieved. Projects that achieve both Tier 1 and 2 can combine those to be 4 additional stories, and then projects that obtain affordable housing and sustainability incentives are allowed the additional tier bonus that's already allowed when those are combined. So we're introducing a new flexibility and relief structure only within the overlay, which is called departures. These are going to allow for form-based adjustments or deviations. It's similar to other flexibility and relief procedures, including minor modifications, which you're familiar with, or variances. So departures are intended to allow form-based adjustments to the requirements of the UDO. The departure must meet the goals of the specific standard while providing exceptional architectural design, which would otherwise not be allowed within the overlay. So a request for the departure is required to receive approval from the Director of Planning or Transportation prior to being reviewed by Planning Commission. The director must find that the site and building design offer a unique and beneficial design. And then all site plans which will require a departure will be reviewed under major modification site plan, or excuse me, major site plan approval through the Plan Commission. So with that, we've proposed some criteria. So each site plan must be reviewed by the Plan Commission and found to meet all of the proposed criteria. These criteria will ensure that the departure does not interfere with the goals of the comprehensive plan or other adopted plans. Provide adequate public services, will not create a hardship on adjacent properties unless adequately mitigated, and that all departures are of a technical nature and are required to provide for an exceptional architectural design which will enhance the visual appeal of the building, significantly enhance the perceived quality of the building facade visible from the street, and strengthen the public-private interaction at street level. So, there's a question you're probably all wondering is why is this transform redevelopment overlay rather than Hopewell overlay district or some other name? It's because the standards were intentionally designed so that they could allow for future expansion either within the Hopewell neighborhood area or throughout the city. These are standards that the staff believes are adequate for providing public-private partnerships throughout the city, and there are focus areas similar to the hospital redevelopment site throughout the city. You can see them kind of in the green boxes here. There are a bunch of them throughout the town, and they may be suitable. This commission or county council or city council, excuse me, may find that this overlay would work there, and we don't want to limit that we want to allow the toolbox to expand here. So with that, the Planning and Transportation recommends that Plan Commission approve the requested waiver of a second hearing and forward ZO 5122 to the Common Council with a positive recommendation. And I can answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from commissioners? Go ahead, Commissioner Enran Randolph.
I brought this up during our luncheon, and I was curious what the impacts of having this overlay over a existing TIF. It's not contiguous with it, it starts kind of splicing it up here and there on the Adams Crossing TIF. It's a portion of that. So I'm kind of curious what your thoughts were about having an overlay over a TIF that doesn't completely contain that TIF.
Jackie Scanlon, Development Services Manager. I think, like we said at the lunch, they're not related. I mean, they're related in that they're both tools that can be used for redevelopment, but whether or not zoning district or overlay is in line exactly with the boundaries of the TIF, I don't think is something that we need to something that we considered.
My question is related. We're looking at creating an overlay that has different setback parameters. And we're looking at a TIF where some of the redevelopment funds can go to support some improvements within that have different standards. And we're looking at creating a new overlay. So the question is, it considered to look at the TIF as we were looking at this overlay?
Okay, so a couple things. This petition, ZO5122, is a text amendment, so it's not a map. So I'm kind of answering a question for the next petition, which is fine. Up to Mr. Whistler, of course. But basically, as I said, no, because this overlay area is dictated by the hospital redevelopment site area, and that is what it was, the base of the area, physical area that we started with when we were looking at the boundaries for where the overlay would go, unrelated to where the TIF is. So I mean, the overlay is just another zoning district, right? So like all of the zoning districts, they don't align with TIF boundaries. So no, we did not take that into consideration that I know of. That may have happened when the initial hospital outline area was determined. And I don't know if anyone else has more information on that than I do.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
That answers my question.
Commissioner St. John.
I have a question, and this is either for planning staff or Mr. Rooker, but we're looking at ZO-51-22, which is a transformation redevelopment overlay, which I understand is a text amendment, but it in the packet is listed as the Hopewell neighborhood overlay. And I know I have a conflict with any conversation we're going to have about the Hopewell area, which is why I'm stepping off, and I believe Commissioner Cochran is too, for the second, which is ZO-5222. So I feel like some of us are getting those put together, and I'm like, probably shouldn't be up here if we're going to throw those two things together.
Well, just to be clear, what we're considering right now is just the text amendment, which sets the, the specifications and the rules for the district. It says nothing about where that district will be. And as was mentioned, the text of this was written specifically so that it is anticipated that it will be applied in places other than just the Hopewell area. So I'd be happy to let Mr. Rooker chime in, but there's nothing about what is currently on the table that is specific to any area on the map.
Yeah, unfortunately, page 29 of the packet lists ZO-51-22 as the Hopewell neighborhood overlay, which concerns me. I thought it was just a text amendment. As you're describing, that was my understanding. So I just want to get clarification, because I certainly don't want to be up here if I shouldn't be.
Thank you, Commissioner St. John. I think it's difficult, and I think you're pointing this out, it's difficult to package, it's difficult for everyone in this room to separate out this overlay text amendment with the subsequent, essentially mapping of that overlay. I think we see that they're intimately interrelated. If you, Commissioner Cochran, think that that likely poses a conflict, I might recommend that just appearance of avoiding the possibility of a conflict of interest, it might be best if you recuse yourself from this petition. That would be my advice.
Yeah, if that's your recommendation, I'm happy to do that. If it's just a text amendment, I would stay, but it sounds like it's too related, and I'm totally fine with that.
Just for clarity, President Whistler is correct. Certainly, the commission is free to recommend that the overlay be not in any particular way, but I think it does provide coherence.
Yeah, I agree. So I will leave.
Okay.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cochran?
I will take Commissioner St. John's lead. I not only represent, of the properties that are listed in the next petition, I represent 3 different properties. So, so.
All right. So we will pause for a moment while we allow our colleagues to exit the dais here, and we'll pick up on our proceedings here in just a moment. All right, so just for anyone in the public who might be wondering what this is all about, just a quick note that we have two pieces to updating the UDO that we're considering here. The first is to establish a new overlay, a new set of rules and restrictions that can be used essentially anywhere in the city. The second would apply those rules specifically to an area where a couple of our colleagues have own property or represent property owners. And so just to be absolutely certain that we're avoiding any potential appearance of conflict, they've decided to recuse themselves from both pieces of the discussion tonight. Again, the first one that we're discussing right now, ZO51-22, is simply the text amendment. So we'll pick up our conversation where we left off, which is, I believe, with questions for staff from commissioners. Are there any other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Seabour.
Thanks. I think two maybe technical questions. One is on one of the changes about requiring any multifamily dwelling unit that has a front building wall facing a street to be raised 2 to 5 feet above the sidewalk level. I'm just, in my head, my initial gut is I don't quite understand what's going on there. And if you could just explain it for me just to understand what that's getting at.
Sure. So, yeah, it's 2 to 5 feet above the sidewalk level. The idea here is to raise windows and some entrances, like I mentioned, and that will provide greater privacy. It's seen as a privacy method for keeping windows along the right-of-way, or along the sidewalk in this case, but making it harder to see through. If you know the near west side, many of those windows are raised a similar height just by the happenstance of the typology of the area, but it's a similar methodology and aim for the raising of the windows. They're often very close to the sidewalk, but hard to see through the window, but still provide the eyes on the street feel of safety and protection. So,
Cool. Thank you for that. That helps me understand it. And I guess the only maybe reaction, or I don't know if it's a concern, but just thinking about like an apartment building, if it's raised, if the front door, I'm more concerned about like an ADA issue adjacent to a sidewalk and how somebody in a wheelchair could accessibly get up to that entrance.
yeah, that's a great question. The primary entrances are required to be at sidewalk grade.
Okay.
This will only be the units that are adjacent to the sidewalk. So
Okay.
the rest of the building can be the 2 feet to 5 feet below. If that's how they want to design it, or they can do an interior ramp. It's up to them. But yeah, it's only the units directly adjacent to the sidewalk.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And then this is maybe more just a question, bigger picture than this item, but in other cases, we've seen developments where maybe there's a parking garage, and here I may be thinking more of the alleys that now intersect a street that we're encouraging more traffic from the properties to use the alleys to then get to the street. And I'm seeing we have 0 building setbacks. And so the potential concern that sometimes I'll note with like parking garages is that the wall goes right up to the sidewalk that people can be walking by, and as you pull out of a parking garage, it can be hard to see. And I just wanting to be mindful of, I think that's a minimum setback, so there's some flexibility to have like a small little triangle or doing things there to help make sure people can see pedestrians on the adjacent. I just wanting to think that through a little bit. Not that I see concerns, but just that is a minimum, I guess, and that we would be able to have some tools there.
Yes, absolutely, it's a minimum. It's a front setback, specifically is a build-to range, so you can build anywhere within that range, and vision clearance triangle still applies. That's elsewhere in the UDO, is untouched.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you. Commissioner Kinsey.
Hi. Yeah, I have a couple of questions. One is just some clarification on the point made about the new text around request for departures. And I wanted some clarification on what exceptional architecture design, what would qualify, what's behind that?
That's a great question. So we did attempt to get at defining it, but we wanted to leave it open to your interpretation. The final say lies in this body's approval. So if you don't agree, then yeah, it's up to you. But specifically, we're looking for things that wouldn't be allowed by code, but do meet the standards, the expectation of the standards as written. So, building height might be something that you can play with to add an architecturally interesting feature that would not be allowed otherwise, and you may want to, this body may see as fit for, approval.
Okay. All right. So it affords more allowance in that, essentially, for architectural design that might be different. Okay. All right. And then let me ask another question. Then this is a more technical question about the transform redevelopment overlay and the idea that this could be then adopted for other parcels or other areas. And I wondered, what's the process for that then? Would that have to go to become a city council, a new overlay suggestion for a new area? Or would that just be something that a petitioner would request? Yeah, I guess I'm trying to understand what that option affords us and then how it would happen.
Sure, yeah. They would be exactly like every other zoning district. As it stands right now, you could request, any petitioner could request to be redeveloped, or to be within the downtown character overlay, even if they're not in the downtown. So this same rules would apply if you can request a zoning map amendment because you're in the city. You could request a zoning map amendment to this overlay. Then this body would weigh in, and Common Council would have final say, similar to every other rezone.
Okay, so it would come from the petitioner, presumably. Okay, but that could be, yeah, I guess I'm thinking we're not going to have a whole lot of hospital redevelopment things, but should we have something that large or that city involved, there could be an adoption of that same transform redevelopment overlay. Okay, and then this could be an embarrassing question to ask in public, but I just want to confirm that all the text that's new to me in our packet that looks like the UDO is all in fact brand new text. It's not a document that is it's not modifying, it's creating a whole new specification, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Similar again to the downtown character overlay, it's a section of 2002, and this will be 200202. I believe is the number, don't hold me to that. But yeah, it'll be a section right after the downtown character overlay, and it just happens to look like the UDO because it's gonna go in there, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, at first I thought maybe I missed this in reading the UDO and I was looking for red line text, but clearly that's not the case because it's all brand new text. Okay, and then I have one last question, and this goes more to our proceedings this evening. If we waive the second hearing, what's the rationale for that? Is it just that we will be so convinced that we don't need to have a second hearing? Or is there some desire to be expeditious in our proceedings? Or what's behind that waiver?
Commissioner Kinsey, thanks for the question. Scott Robinson, Director of Planning and Transportation. Really, the request comes on the basis that this was originated from Common Council through their resolution and not per se a staff-driven amendment. If it were a staff-driven amendment, we would certainly not request that, but given the fact that we've had plenty of deliberations with our elected officials about the intent behind this, we felt that it warranted the request for a one hearing process before this body. But with that said, it's at your discretion, so that's the nature of the request.
Thank you for clarifying that. I think that is an important thing to note and to have a public accounting for. I want to avoid the appearance that somehow we're pushing things through that, for any reason, we don't want to push anything through. We want to be deliberative and we want to consider them and ensure there's ample time for public comment and public knowledge of this process. So I just want to just thank you for confirming that. I think that's an important point, that this has been deliberated quite a bit, and it originates from Common Council as an important aspect of our proceedings tonight. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just wanted to Ms. Scanlon for jumping the gun and looking at the second petition and asking questions regarding that. Thank you for entertaining my questions, though.
No problem. Any other questions for staff? I have one. When we look at the pedestrian scale residential requirements or standards, there's one that talks about the building setback being further back and courtyards being visible from the sidewalk. Does this create a case where you could have as you're walking down a block, there's a different setback between commercial buildings and residential buildings? And is that intentional?
So yeah, a setback, it's a build-to range, like I said, and so within that, you're allowed to ebb and flow as the developer would like to. And then, yes, the idea is that courtyards and other bump outs would be intentional in creating a more walkable, active space rather than being right up against a brick wall.
So the idea is to encourage residential designs that have a bit of a front porch or front yard?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah, okay. All right, that's my only question. Any other questions? All right, let's go then to public comment. If you'd like to make comment on ZO51-22, if you're here in the chambers, please step up to the podium, state your name for the record, and you will have 5 minutes to comment. If you are joining us remotely, click that reactions button at the bottom of your Zoom window, click on the raise hand button, and we will do our best to recognize you in the order that you raised your hand.
Mr. Whistler, can I ask Mr. Ricker a question quickly?
Yes, you may.
Sorry, it's 1 till 9. Do we need to discuss? We're not on the last petition yet.
The rules state that if you can't go past 9:30 without suspension.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking 9.
New petition up after 9 o'clock.
Without suspending the rules?
You're fine till 9:30 to continue on with this petition.
But we'll need to suspend the
have
rules
a
before we begin deliberations on the next petition.
Oh, thank
Okay.
you.
Just as a reminder, if the commission wants to suspend the rules, that has to be unanimous vote.
Unanimous of the entire commission or unanimous of the members in attendance?
The members in attendance.
Okay, thank you. Well, then, I think we can continue with public comment, and we'll get to the next issue when we get there. Thank you.
Next petition, as we commented, things are so intertwined here that I think it's worthwhile for me to make at least some comments now. And I think my first one will be to request that the commission disregard the waiver, not grant the waiver. I think we see there's enough questions, particularly with the two projects, the two petitions going together.
Sorry, hold on just 1 minute. We'll make sure we get your audio here
Excuse
so
me.
that this is really on the record.
Should I
good?
repeat everything I've said? Okay. My name is Chris Huntington. I'm one of the property owners that's involved in the next petition. Not that I'm initiating it, but as we've discussed, things are so intertwined, I wanted to go ahead and make some comments now to make sure they didn't get lost. And I think my first request would be that the commission do not approve the waiver. I think we've seen there's enough new stuff going on here and enough questions that it's worthwhile for additional comment, as well as consideration by the commission, et cetera, and as well as a chance to see some evidence that I'll be discussing in a moment. One of the reasons I'm here is, in my opinion, and I was not involved with everything that's going on here, clearly this overlay was designed with the Hopewell project in mind. It's obviously been modified to be capable of being applied elsewhere, but more importantly from my standpoint and some other property owners, it's also now being applied to properties that really aren't necessarily directly connected with Hopewell, and it's essentially been swept up And I don't think the ramifications for those properties and how these rules can apply to those properties or not, and the hardships they will cause have been considered. Specifically, I'm talking about the alley access rule. To the extent that I'm creating brand new plots or platting a new thing, I'm putting in new alleys, everything's great. I can design the alleys, no problem doing rear access. I challenge every member here to drive down the alley between House Street and Second and consider the existing properties, existing buildings that would then, if there were any new development, have to access off that alleyway. There's a pretty substantial grade there. We've got at least 2 buildings there that have parking directly off that alley and are essentially at about the 2nd story of the building because that's how steep the grade is. Now, imagine trying to build your driveway access to this property off of that alley. Oh, and by the way, it's all supposed to be covered with permeable pavers. How can I drop 20, 30 feet, 15 feet to access a parking lot and still have it covered with a permeable paver? Throw in the setbacks and a bunch of other problems, and the bottom line is I think it could create a definite hardship for a lot of these properties. In terms of its goal to reduce cutouts and driveways on 2nd Street, there's only about a half a dozen of them that are involved here. And this is running all the way from the Beeline Trail to past the, well, to the I-Center, Walker Street. And a few of these, by the way, would still remain because they actually are on existing alleys. The other problem here is when you're talking about new alleys, as I said, you can plat them any way you want. We have existing alleys, which in some cases, you don't even know they exist. For example, if the I-Center were redeveloped, it currently has an entryway on 2nd and an entryway on Walker Street. Guess what? Neither one of those will be used because there is a platted alley that's about, I don't know how long, it's not in use, it doesn't really go anywhere, but there's a platted alley. The I-Center or that redevelopment would need all their access to be done through there, which I don't think is necessarily conducive to some of the things that are being talked about here. So that's what my comments are for now. I don't know that I'll make any more comments related to the second petition, but the point is that we've got a bunch of properties that have been swept up with this alley requirement that I simply think is impractical for them. This could be addressed by simply removing these properties from the overlay and simply rezoning them, which the next petition is going to be doing anyway. But anyway, I think I've made my point and I'm starting to ramble a little bit. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there any additional public comment? I don't see anyone else here in the chamber. Is anyone
We have
online
one on
raising their hands?
Zoom here. It's just listed as admin.
I believe that might be me.
Yep. Go ahead with your name.
Okay. All right. I'm Philip Stafford, and I'm the former chair of the Commission on Aging. And so I don't represent the commission anymore. But I would like to draw your attention to the comprehensive plan relative to this question. Not only the old hospital site, but also the switchyard site were specifically referenced as focus areas in the comprehensive plan, and focus areas in which the concept of livability or lifetime community could be incorporated into the planning and I assume the zoning. In the comp plan reads specifically that in a lifetime, the purpose of a lifetime community is to leverage opportunities for city and private planning and investment to achieve a lifetime community defined as a place that promotes social, physical, mental, and emotional well-being for persons of all abilities across the entire lifespan. The lifetime community concept is part of the international effort to make cities more livable by emphasizing quality of life for people of all ages, abilities, and socioeconomic backgrounds. And the Hopewell neighborhood and perhaps others that might be entertained under this concept of the overlay can be created in Bloomington. There was a charrette process, as you know, associated with the Hopewell neighborhood, and in the master plan for the Hopewell neighborhood, it says the plan should leverage development and investment opportunities to achieve a lifetime community, defined as a place that promotes social, physical, mental, and emotional well-being for persons of all abilities across the entire lifetime. Hence, I was appreciative of the commissioner's question about the accessibility of multifamily developments, residences from the sidewalk, and was satisfied to hear the answer to that question. I was a little curious about the preclusion of retail in the neighborhood, because I think retail has the potential for fulfilling the idea or the concept of a lifetime community. I'm not sure how retail is defined in this context, but retail might be an important element in a lifetime community. There are some amenities in that neighborhood, of course, that would fulfill that goal, such as Kroger's and the pharmacy at Kroger's and so forth. But I worry a little bit about totally precluding retail. But I'm pleased with the changes that have been incorporated into the overlay standards, because I feel they do provide support to develop a livable and walkable community for all ages. I don't have a lot of facility with the jargon of zoning and the standards and so forth, but I would call attention to the commissioners to the testimony that the Commission on Aging provided in 2018, a 15-page document that talks about creating a livable community, a lifetime community in that neighborhood that obviously goes beyond certain aspects of zoning purely defined, but also talks about programming and the possibility for leveraging funding in that neighborhood that can help create a lifetime community in that neighborhood. So it's not just a question of the zoning, but also TIF funding or business improvement district funding or other kinds of funding that could come in to that neighborhood to help develop a lifetime community. So I hope you don't lose touch in this transform opportunity, lose touch with the concept of a lifetime community and the potential that holds for this neighborhood. I understand that the obscure phrase transform development overlay does not have a lot of meaning for people unless they're familiar with the concept, the definition of transform from the comprehensive plan relative to other development themes such as maintaining and enhancing neighborhoods and transforming neighborhoods. So this is a transformative opportunity, if you will, but please don't lose touch with the concept of a lifetime community and what that might mean in the development of zoning standards that would lead to the creation of that kind of a community and that neighborhood, not only in Hopewell, but also perhaps in the Switchyard area.
Thank you, sir. Your time has expired. Are there any other public comments?
There's no one else on Zoom.
All right, last call for public comment. Again, just click that reactions button, click the raise hand button if you're online. If you're here in the chambers, just step up to the podium. All right. Seeing no additional public comment, we will come back to the commission for any additional questions or comments or motion. Well, I have a question. I guess I'll just ask staff if they would care to respond to any of the public comment. In particular, would really like to hear why the exclusion of any retail. I mean, specifically, restaurant is a permitted use, but why, what about restaurant is different from other retail forms, and why were others excluded?
So the excluded uses hopefully aren't retail or common commercial. It's like I said, it's like mortuary and other slightly more extreme uses. The rest of the uses allowed in each base underlying zoning district are fully allowed. And the reason restaurant is different is because it was limited in the RM zoning district to 2,500 square feet, and we wanted to double that to 5,000 square feet. So we had to write a new use-specific standard and permit them.
So I'm sorry. So, I mean, in 5A, excluded uses specifically states retail sales,
It does.
right? Are we misinterpreting that?
Oh, that's retail big box, sorry. So that would be like a Walmart or a Target or a Meijer.
So retail sales, comma, big box
Yes, sorry.
is one item
There-
in that list.
Yes.
The comma is very confusing there.
The commas were an error. It was a copy and paste error, so sorry about that.
Can we amend that perhaps to be retail sales dash big box so that we can make that clear that that's an individual item?
It
in
matches
list?
the definition, the use as defined. It will be updated to be more clear. We have an amendment that will appear in front of council to fix some typos, including those commas. Those are supposed to be semicolons.
Got it. All right. So any small-scale retail would be allowed would be a permitted use if it's permitted in the underlying
Absolutely,
zone.
yes.
Great. Would you care to comment on some of the other issues that were brought up, particularly the question of alley access and grade and pavers, and if that's something that you had considered?
Sure. Well, so alley access, we kind of had our hands tied there in that council had that requirement, so we just adopted it. That was what their vision for the overlay was. We agree with it. Cutting drive cuts, especially along roads like Second, would be great. So yes, there potentially may be obstacles which a variance would be required, but that would be up to the Board of Zoning Appeals. You could certainly request a variance from almost anything in the overlay. But yeah, the specific standard was not derived from staff.
All right, thank you. Any other questions from commissioners or comments? Commissioner Smith.
The only one when I saw that it was 85% impervious surface allowed, do we have any concerns about that with flooding?
So no, the overlay has a master plan, as you're familiar with, which will specifically be designed to mitigate flooding potential. That's why the impervious surface increase was seen as acceptable. So no, I don't believe there's any issue, and engineering and the developer will hopefully take care of any concerns when those come up.
Thank you. Any other questions? Commissioner Kinsey.
Thank you. I don't have a question, but I think I just want to say that I generally like what this very idyllic sounding transform redevelopment overlay proposes. I appreciate the incentivizing of both affordability and sustainability. And I like the freeing up for exceptional architectural design that it allows. And I like the specification of permeable pavers and all the things that make this more accessible. I think my only hesitation is about some of the aspects that the commenter raised, Chris Huntington raised, about other property owners' input and thinking through what alley access would mean in some of these properties. And I realize that gets really specific very quickly. And, this is intended as an overlay, and even within that, I believe there can be exceptions, and somebody should correct me if there aren't, or there would not be variances allowed within that. That would be important to know. But and then coming off that concern is, I'm just wondering about the hour and it being whatever, 9:17 now, and whether we should not waive the second hearing and allow this to continue to the next meeting. I don't want to belabor something that seems like it's gone through good deliberation, so please don't think that that's what I'm suggesting, but I also don't want to rush things if they deserve a little bit more attention to some of these details. So I'd like some, it's a mix of a comment and a slight question about how do we allow for some of those exceptions?
I'll say, related specifically to the alley access, like Mr. Roebling said, that was one of the 8 criteria that came from council, so we won't take that out. We don't suggest that that gets taken out because that's what they dictated to us to prepare very specifically. So it seems as though they would add that back in, and then it would come back to us after that was re-amended. So if you have, and Mr. Robinson can correct me, but if you have issues with some of the extra things that are in, that don't come from the resolution, that may be a different issue. But those items from the resolution, we are, they have directed us to prepare those, and so that's what we've had to do in this situation.
Scott Robinson, Director of Planning and Transportation. Thanks, Commissioner Kinsey, on the question. I will say just a couple things to keep in mind, and certainly, again, it's your discretion as a commission to continue this to another hearing. But with that said, Phase 1 East, which is the property currently demolished, engineering's in there, or the site has been cleared, and engineering is working on coordinating utility development. That's property that is under city ownership, and the remainder of the hospital site will soon be under city ownership, redevelopment commission. So we being the city are working with developers to redevelop the site, and so the sooner that we start figuring out what standards we're talking about, the better. With that said, we can always amend the rules. We're going to already bring forward, at the beginning of the night, I already committed to amending the downtown first floor requirement. If there's a standard in these specifications that we don't quite get right and we start hearing from the development community, we'll bring them back this spring. The risk that we might have by having another meeting, we're in this challenging time of year with the holidays coming up, when council can get it on their legislative calendar, that we might actually end up timing this amendment very close to our kind of UDO amendments in the spring. So with that said, I think I would certainly request the commission to move forward with that tonight. If there's concerns that you have, staff can certainly entertain an amendment as we go before Common Council. Thank you.
Thank you for that. One very specific question then that helps me understand what we're working with here. What happens then if a current property owner who is in the overlay, as Chris Huntington, the commenter, mentioned, the property changes, the I-Center was the example. What allowances do they have then? Should we not make some change to the specific text around alley? Let's presume it goes through as it is. What would then a property owner, what recourse would they have? Would it be a standard request through the BZA, or what? How would that occur?
Yeah, so as it stands right now, a petitioner could request a variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals if there were an issue with that. And then not every development would trigger this requirement. So there are limited compliance standards within the UDO. So you could expand, I don't remember them all off the top of my head, I'm so sorry. But there are some that would not trigger full compliance on the site, which would include these alley requirements. So that would be like a change of use or something to that effect.
Thank you.
So just to clarify that, so an existing single-family home, as long as it's staying a single-family home and not, having a change of use or some sort of massive change to the site plan, would not be forced into compliance with the new standards?
That's correct. Or if they subdivided, they would also be required to meet the new standards. But yes, if they remained unchanged, they would not be required to meet this standard.
Thanks. Sorry, Commissioner Kinsey, did you have another question?
No, that's where I was kind of going to. I was imagining that if someone wanted to develop, let's say a duplex, they would have to go through that and figure out how to allow alley, well, there wouldn't even be unless there was an existing platted alley or, yeah, it's hard to imagine all the repercussions on existing property. I think it's easy to look at the undeveloped or yet to be developed property and design this, but it's harder when it's existing property. Thank you. That's probably it for me. Sorry.
Okay, any other questions or comments or motions from commissioners? We are getting very close to 9:30. I have a question, and am I the
I
only
would
one
like
that
the
failed to
motion
eat
that
before we
we-
started this meeting tonight?
I'd like the motion that we take a vote on this as it's to add the overlay.
All right, let me just read the staff recommendation, and maybe that will help. If I can find the memo here, or perhaps we can put it up on the screen.
This is just voting on the text, not the map.
This is, yes, correct. So, yes, any motion right now would need to apply only to ZO 51-22, the text amendment. And there it is on the screen. The staff recommendation is that the Plan Commission approve the requested waiver of a second hearing and forward ZO 51-22 to the Common Council with a positive recommendation. So Commissioner Smith,
I'll second that.
Is that your motion?
Yes, it is.
And
Thank you.
Commissioner Kinsey has seconded. Okay. Any final discussion before we call the roll on the motion to forego the second hearing and forward this to the Common Council with a positive recommendation? All right. And just as a reminder, this will require 5 votes, just like anything else, even though there are fewer of us here. So, Darla, would you please call the roll?
Ballard.
Yes.
Burrell.
Yes.
Seaboard.
Yes.
Pereira.
Yes. Yes.
Kinsey.
Yes.
Smith.
Yes.
And Whistler.
Yes. Okay, that motion carries, and we have one petition remaining. It's not quite 9:30, but I think we still need to suspend the rules since we're past 9 in order to introduce this. Yes?
That's correct, President Whistler. I would recommend 2 things. Your rules say 2 things. First, they say you can't consider any new petition after 9 p.m. This would be a new petition. Your rules also say that you adjourn at 9:30 p.m. regardless of whether or not you're in the middle of a petition. So if you wanted to continue with the meeting, I might suggest a motion to suspend both the 9 o'clock rule and the 9:30 rule.
Yes. we could handle both of those in one motion. If someone would like to make that, I would also just encourage you, if you do have substantial questions about the boundaries or the changes to the map, let that be known now before we decide to continue this discussion. I'm happy to support suspending the rules if this is going to be, pretty quick. But if you think we need more discussion about the lines on the map, let it be known before we take the vote on suspending the rules here. Is there a motion on suspension of the rules?
I'll move that we suspend the rules to start a new petition after 9 o'clock and continue the meeting after 9:30. And just the quick rationale is this next item feels very related to the previous one, and I believe there's time constraints for council to consider these, and it just seems it'd be nice to keep them together and on the same track if possible.
Thank you. Any other comments or
Second.
questions on the motion?
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any comment before we call the roll on that motion? All right, the motion is to suspend the rules and introduce this additional petition and continue our deliberation as long as it takes past 9:30.
I do want to mention, just as one point of order before the vote, your rules do also say one thing I neglected to mention before, and that's that if you don't hear a petition that's on your schedule, the Plan Commission is supposed to schedule a special meeting within 1 week of the original meeting to then take up the item that was not heard. I apologize for neglecting that.
Thank you. So
before.
what you're saying
And in
is,
light of the
if we
holiday-
don't suspend the rules, we're coming back for another special meeting.
By next Monday, yes. Thank you.
Okay. So, yeah, take that into consideration. All right. Can we call the roll on the motion, please?
Whistler,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Ferrera. No. Was that no? Seaboard,
Yes.
Burrell. Yes. Fowler.
Yes.
All right. So I believe that needed to be a unanimous, and since that was not unanimous, that motion fails. That means we've got to schedule another meeting. Do we need to do that tonight before we adjourn?
Ooh, will you bring your computer? I can't see the rooms.
Julia, did I not call you?
You did not, but I'm guessing that it doesn't matter, but I would say yes.
Thank you.
Mike, kick it over there. Do we have to actually set the actual date, or do we just have to meet within the week so then we could
Well, I
try to
think
iron
that staff is
Determining
deliberating on this. The questions that I would have are, I think the rule just says we have to meet again within the week.
Well,
I don't know if we also have notice requirements that come into play here. Do we need to schedule this right now, or can we schedule the next meeting via email tomorrow? I do think, my preference would be that we get something scheduled tonight, just for the sake of the public, knowing when it's going to take place. Anybody who might be watching now, who might want to continue to follow this deliberation, would benefit from knowing when it's going to be.
There is no notice requirement, however, we'll need 48 hours notice to post the agenda. So this counts as the notice because they've already noticed the petition. We've already.
So if we were to simply meet at our typical time 1 week from today, next Monday, 5:30 PM, we'd still be within the window?
You would be. We're looking for a room, hopefully, within that time period.
Is this room not available?
Okay, this room is open next Monday at 5:30, if the Plan Commission can do
Yes.
that.
All right, I would propose that we,
Yeah, so that's the 21st, right? Yeah, November
yes,
21st.
all right.
Yes.
I would like to move that we schedule a special session to continue this deliberation Monday, the 21st at 5:30 PM in this room. Would someone second that motion? Sorry, do we have a second? Yes,
Mr.
okay.
Smith, second.
Any objections? Any questions or comments? Do we need to call the roll on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you all want to have discussion. Obviously, at least 5 of you have to be able to attend for that. Oh, you can just call a special session on your own, Mr. Whistler. But we do
can?
want to make sure, apparently, that a quorum could be in attendance. Does anyone in this room think they can attend next Monday at 5:30 PM?
Is anyone who absolutely cannot be here next Monday at 5:30 PM? I promise I'm going to keep it quick.
I can be there.
Thanks, Julia.
All right, I hereby call a special session for Monday, the 21st of November at 5:30 PM. And we are adjourned for this evening. Thank you all for your patience.
Thank you all.
Thank you.